Good afternoon, everyone. I will now call this public hearing to order. I would ask everyone if they would silence their cell phones. They can be rather distracting during the meeting. Also, I would ask Representative Dush if he would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Barrar, and I am the Majority Chairman of the House Veteran Affairs and Emergency Preparedness Committee. We're here today to examine House Bill 759, which is co-prime sponsored by Representative Cris Dush and Representative Barry Joswiak. This legislation will allow for volunteer fire departments to bill for real and reasonable cost associated with an emergency response by their fire or rescue department. This issue spans many decades, and our committee, under my term as chairman, has conducted 3 public hearings and several stakeholder meetings, several of which were conducted under the SR6 Commission study. We have a fine selection of panelists here today, and I look forward to hearing excellent testimony and discussion on this important financial tool for our very struggling fire departments across the state. Chairman Senato, any opening remarks?
Thank you, Chairman Barrar. It's nice to see so many of our members here this week, and we look forward to the testimony today.
Okay, starting down here with the Secretary of the Committee, would you, the members and the staff, please introduce themselves?
Mark Gillen, Berks, Lancaster Counties.
Joe Webster, House District 150, Montgomery County.
Christina Sappi, 158th Chester County.
Jim Rigby, 71st District, Cambria, Somerset Counties.
Barry Joswiak, 5th District, Berks County.
Cris Dush, 66th Legislative District, Jefferson, Indiana counties.
Frank Ryan, 101st District, Lebanon County, Pennsylvania.
Todd Polinchuk, the 144th District from central part of Bucks County.
Good afternoon. Matt Gobler, 75th District, Elk and Clearfield counties.
Frank Ferry, 142nd District, Bucks County.
Sean Harris, Research Analyst for the committee.
Rick O'Leary, Executive Director for Chairman Barrar.
Mike Hillman, Democratic Executive Director for the committee.
Linda Culver, 108th District, Northumberland and Snyder counties.
Carol Hill Evans, 95th District in York County.
Great. Thank you, everyone. It's great to have a lot of the committee members here today. First, I'd like to ask that Representative Cris Dush and Barry Joswiak make some short remarks, since they are the authors of the bill.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm actually very happy to co-prime this with Representative Joswiak. When I first came in, one of the first things that I had done was take this bill on. This is the 3rd session we've been running it. And the reason is we're right on Interstate 80, and we have so many vehicles traveling through our area that are causing accidents and just contributing to the workload for our volunteer fire companies, but there is no direct support for them. Our guys are putting out pigs, which are meant to prevent toxic waste from getting into our streams, and we've got some of the purest streams in the country right through our districts, and our guys take that very seriously. That stuff is expensive. They're sitting out there for hours on end, burning up diesel fuel. The wear and tear, pardon me, on the equipment is significant. In a district where when there was an $85 decrease in the median family income from 2000 to 2015, my district took an $1,143 drop. So for these volunteer fire companies, they're trying to get money from people who are making less, and it's a significant impact on the communities. We have dedicated people, and I'm proud to support them. And I think when the insurance carriers are charging premiums, saying that they're going to be paying for reimbursements, and not just with vehicle accidents, but house fires and that sort of thing, they ought to be forced to pay for it if they're taking that money from the people who are the insureds. With that, I'll pass it on to Representative Joswiak.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My background is I was a state trooper for 26 years and mostly in Philadelphia and Berks counties. And I got to see the firemen actually in action many, many times. And, you know, really, part of my district is Interstate 78, which is a really busy road, has a lot of serious accidents. Matter of fact, last night it was shut down again for 5 hours. Tractor trailer flipped over. These accidents that the troopers go to, and local police as well, look for the firemen to help them. Firemen are essential when they get to these incidents. And the part that I'm glad to be a co-sponsor on this bill is because when the police get there and the investigation's over and they leave, they get paid. When the tow truck guys get there, they pick up the vehicles, they get paid. The firemen get there, the firefighters, they show up, they direct the traffic, they take people out of their vehicles, they're trapped in them, they save lives. They respond, they have their own fuel, they have their own tools. It's time that the firemen get paid as well as everybody else. So I'm proud to help sponsor this bill. It's a good bill, and I would encourage the members of this committee move this bill forward as fast as we can. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Thank you, representatives. I appreciate that. At this time, I'd like to call up our first panel. And I'm going to let you come up and introduce yourself, but if you would, tell us who you represent. Mr. Jerry Ozog, Mr. Sean Grimm, Mr. David Nelson, Mr. Darrell Kaiser, Mr. Iam Brazunas, hope I said that right, Mr. Andy Hedges, and Mr. Scott Rhino. Do we have enough chairs up there for you?
I think we're close here.
Okay, just pull one up from if you want, from the audience. I guess the hardest part is going to be for you to decide who's going to speak first.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, good afternoon. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to speak today. Again, good to see everyone. My name is Jerry Ozog. I'm the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Fire and Emergency Services Institute. We're the statewide advocacy and education organization that works at multiple levels of government to improve and sustain fire and emergency services in Pennsylvania. I've assembled a group of subject matter experts representing the diverse fire service in Pennsylvania, which includes rural areas of Pennsylvania's, suburban areas, boroughs, townships, smaller departments, consolidated departments, to speak with you in regards to this important thing. There's three big things that are going on in the fire service, and many of you are already very much aware of those as part of SR 6 and the discussions that we've had for many years. Number one is money. The decrease in funding through fundraisers and donations, and the increase in operations. The second thing is organizations that are struggling to respond to calls on a regular basis due to the lack of volunteerism. And number three, the general decline in populations in certain areas where the communities are getting older and the volunteer firefighters are getting older. The critical thing that many organizations, it's the four-legged stool of funding the organization. Number one is the donations that people give to the organization. Number two is the fund drives and fundraisers and chicken barbecues that they hold. Number three is the government funding that they do get through the Relief Association. Some have tax dollars. And then fourth is their auxiliary business operations, which some have social clubs. There's fire companies that own campgrounds, there's fire companies that own car washes, all of which are unstable at this time. And this legislation will help as a part of the puzzle. I'd also like to thank, I see members from Jefferson County that have attended. It's great to see other people that throughout the fire service in Pennsylvania that attend this organization. We'll go down through the panel, and I'll close with some remarks when we're done. And if you wish to ask us questions, we'll absolutely be able to handle that. So we'll go with Sean first, and you start your introduction.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, fellow representatives. My name is Sean Grimm. I'm with the Millersburg Fire Company in Upper Dauphin County here, and we cover an area approximately 27 square miles in our first due, which is Millersburg Borough and Upper Paxton Township. A lot of our hazards include a good sizable chunk of the Susquehanna River. We have wildland areas, a lot of farm areas. So those are some of our prime hazards that we're dealing with. For some time now, I'm sure you've been made aware of the volunteer firefighter crisis in Pennsylvania as well as across the country. No longer can we say this is a looming crisis. It is very much a real crisis, and one that is especially affecting those of us in rural settings. There are many times when I sit at work and see a call come in and turn on the scanner and hear only one of our pieces of apparatus respond, and then with only 2 firefighters. I hear other companies struggle to get out as well, and it seems like there's no help for those who volunteer to help others. The time to talk about doing something about this crisis has passed. The crisis is here, and the time to act is now. The fire company I'm with is fortunate enough to have had progressive leaders in the past that worked with our borough and township to enact a fire tax that has become our sole source of funding and eliminated the antiquated notion of begging for money for protecting our citizens. This is one of, if not the main purposes of government as stated in our Constitution. Many other rural fire companies are not as fortunate and still rely on fundraisers of all kinds, whether it be chicken barbecues, carnivals, raffles, or any number of other methods. Some departments in my area could be in dire straits if a bad weather week strikes during their annual carnival, which is their sole source of funding for the year. This is unacceptable in the 21st century. House Bill 759 could help some of our rural departments that aren't as fortunate as mine. This bill could provide a means for them to provide fire service that we are tasked with, which is just about anything. When people are in need, they want someone to show up in a quick and competent fashion, whether they're volunteer or not. It doesn't matter to Mrs. Smith if the person coming into their aid is getting a paycheck or is responding out of the goodness of their heart. Is 759 the best way of funding our fire departments? No, but it is certainly better than making volunteers who never signed up to sell chickens to be able to do their jobs. I would like to see that this bill allowing for fire companies to bill for services rendered being a possible supplement to the funds that we already receive. I don't foresee this replacing any of those sources at this time, and concerns I have fielded regarding this bill are pointed towards the very rural areas. How would this billing be administered? If a fire company answers 50 calls a year, that company may be canceled on several or arrive or go in service immediately without incurring an individual to bill or expense. How would billing work on the tree down or wires down incident where there is no individual to bill? Would we bill Verizon or PPL? I know of one company that tried a billing scenario and found that the return wasn't worth the attempt. Many times the insurance would not pay, nor would the individual. Regarding Section 79803, subsection D, I would like to see more clarification on how billing would work in mutual aid situations and multiple fire company responses. Would separate billing for each company be a result of automatic aid or mutual aid? It states that a single bill would be created if the incident command requests the apparatus or it comes from a public safety answering point. How would that be defined? Those would be some questions that would need to be addressed in potential amendments down the line. I would like to thank the members of the committee and the sponsors of this bill for introducing legislation that looks to assist us as we try and maintain the volunteer fire service in the Commonwealth. I and others like me appreciate your support and look forward to further support in the future. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is David Nelson. I am the fire chief for Whitehall Township near Allentown, Pennsylvania. We cover roughly 13 square miles, running 989 fire-only calls. Target hazards for Whitehall Township include 1 gasoline with 3 500,000-gallon tanks, 1 natural gas terminal, the largest mall in the county, the Lehigh Valley Mall, Interstate 22, Highway 145, which are both 2- and 3-lane roads, Whitehall High School, as well as middle school and 2 elementaries, as well as natural hazards include flooding and winter storms. The Whitehall Bureau of Fire is 90% funded through the township, the other 10% coming from the Firefighters Relief Association, the Firefighter Association, and fundraising. As I'm sure you are aware, the Northeast Pennsylvania's decline of the volunteer firefighter has dropped from approximately 300,000 to 30,000. Recruitment and retention are one of the major challenges within our department. It has become increasingly more difficult to recruit younger firefighters. If we do acquire them, it is usually for a short period of time before they head off to college or their prospective careers. If they do stay past this time, there will be a time where they will become married and start to have their own family of their own. The members will ultimately become more consumed with their family, respectfully so. Most younger families have to work 2 jobs to make ends meet. We also have concerns for their training levels when they come back. That they can, excuse me. If we do get them back after that time, it is not usually in the same capacity as in the past. We have concerns of their training levels that they can give to the department. Daytime staffing is extremely low in all areas of the state. It is extremely important that we support Initiative SR6 to ensure minimum fire and EMS coverage throughout government partnership. By allowing this, we could form county-wide fire departments that could combine resources. This would include apparatus, personnel, and equipment, cutting costs to the local entities and providing more manpower and alleviating duplicated resources. Departments are struggling to be able to purchase personal protective equipment at a cost of $7,500 at firefighter, as well as hundreds of thousands of dollars for apparatus, for vehicles with extremely minimal return. Obtaining quality as well as certifications for their members to be properly trained to respond to emergency incidents and mitigate them professionally. All of this takes time. Between 2 jobs, families, trainings, as well as responding to calls, this leaves very little time for volunteers to fundraise. Most volunteer firefighters did not join the fire department to fundraise. They do it to make themselves and their communities safer. Insurance billing for fire departments is a drastic need not only for our volunteers but career departments to sustain an all-hazard mitigation department that is expected from our community and state. Just think about who you call in an emergency. If an electrical line is down, if there's a house fire, if your family member is entrapped inside a vehicle, the river has flooded the banks, and you are trapped, as well as hazardous material incidents. All of these are tasks completed by fire departments across the state. Without these funds, our struggling career and volunteer firefighters will have to cut services or cut training and equipment, and making these tasks extremely dangerous for the firefighters that they are already responding to dangerous situations. Our department currently bills insurance for our response to incidents. Utilizing these funds for our training grounds, our department has the only live fire training facility within Lehigh County. It not only serves our community in Lehigh County, but other surrounding counties. This facility not only benefits our department, but the other counties around that area, and recently it had some structural damage that's going to cost us roughly $60,000 to repair that would have to come out of our budget. With this insurance billing, this is actually going to save us money and be allowed to repair this thing so that we could have other fire departments have safety. I strongly urge you to support and pass HB 759 for the career and volunteer fire departments with the addition of more updated billing charges versus the Stafford Act. Thank you.
My name is Daryl Kaiser. I have 27 years in the fire service, and I represent Garden Spot Fire Rescue, which is located in eastern Lancaster County. We serve all of New Holland Borough, approximately 75% of Earl Township and 55% of East Earl Township. Last time I was here was in 2013, where we were awarded the governor's award for the merger of our 2 fire departments, Liberty Fire Company and Blue Ball Fire Company, in an effort to sustain volunteerism. In 2018, we responded to 490 calls. Our first due area is approximately 30 square miles, but we also service 100 to 125 square miles of mutual aid with special services for ladder truck, a heavy rescue, an air truck, and boats, mostly for floodwaters. New Holland Borough is at the center of our first due, and even though it's at a population of 5,000 people, it grows to 12,000 people during the workday. We have major industries in that town, such as Case New Holland, Tyson Foods, Fleur de Lys with American Food Products. Both of those two places have enough anhydrous ammonia to wipe out our entire town, along with the tourism of Lancaster County. Shady Maple's in our first due, so we have plenty of people coming to our area. We operate 3 stations with 11 pieces of apparatus, 2 duty buggies on a $900,000 a year budget. We raise approximately 55% of our funding from fund drives, 20% from fundraisers, 20% from the municipalities, 5% from grants, and we do a third service billing for motor vehicle accidents that we get money from the insurance companies. The third party billing service would be PA Fire Recovery. Volunteers are a concern, as it's been mentioned here before, and daytime calls are a challenge. We are very fortunate at Garden Spot Fire Rescue. We have 3 businesses that provide staffing to our Monday to Friday daytime calls for our 3 stations. 2 of those, they are paying the employees as they respond. We regularly honor those businessmen because in lots of ways they're taking a double hit. They're letting people go and they're paying them, and they can't bill anybody for the things that they do during that time. And yet, even though we're blessed, our average number of response is falling off. This past year, when I did my annual report to the municipalities, I looked back 5 years. We were at an average of 15.8 members per call in 2013, and in 2018, we're at 11.6. There was a 20% increase in calls, but a 26% decrease in personnel. Another challenge that we have is the funding. Last year, being proactive after talking to our municipalities over and over again that we were running out of funds and we were only able to take care of our operations instead of our stations, and they did step up to the plate and help us with projects in and around our stations. We decided to hire a business developer that would go out to the 400 businesses. Only 20% of those 400 businesses in our first due contribute to our fund drive. And he would help them understand our needs and the value that they're receiving, the volunteer service that they're receiving for absolutely nothing. HB 759 would give us the income that could relieve volunteers of doing endless hours of, as mentioned here before, selling chickens or fundraisers. That's not what the guys come to do anymore. Our demographics, our times have changed. The firehouse used to be the kind of the center of the community, and it was a place to hang out. It's not that anymore. The guys that are involved are guys that want to run calls, and that's basically all they want to do, and that's all the time that they've got to do. And so this House bill would definitely help us with funding to hopefully maybe take up one of those 10% that I spoke of earlier. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Eamon Brazunas. I'm the fire chief of Berwyn Fire Company, Chester County. I've been a volunteer for 21 years. I work full-time with the Radnor Fire Company, Delaware County, as our administrative director. Been there for 11 years. Thank the chairman and thank the representatives for the time to be here today and talk about this important bill. I guess I'll bounce around a little bit here. I mean, a lot of things have been repeated or emphasized already. I think the biggest thing you heard today is the guys don't want to be fundraising. We don't ask people to volunteer at the fire company, whether in the rural sections of Pennsylvania or in areas where I'm at in Chester County, where it's a little more populated, that it's not what people sign up to do. They want to serve their community. They want to train, and they want to respond to calls. And when they're done with that, they want to focus on their job and hang out with their families. That's the message we deliver to our township partners routinely. At the local levels, you heard from my colleagues here, we're all doing things as best we can to communicate with our local officials. One of the things that we hear consistently is what's going on with the state. Obviously, a lot of the work that this committee's been involved in, and that's our 6th group, we are sharing that information. And, you know, we know the law states local government is responsible for providing fire EMS. It doesn't specify at what level, though. It's very general. Unfortunately, that creates a significant challenge at the local level when we have conversations, when we talk about things as standard of cover. which is talked about in the SR6. If those things were codified, more solidified for us, a lot of things we're talking about would be easy. We talk about adding paid staff in, how many trucks we need in a certain area. Obviously, I had the opportunity, I know the one representative represents Clearfield County. I volunteered at Phillipsburg Fire Department when I went to Penn State. Obviously, totally different dynamic up there versus Berwyn, Chester County. Totally different. When you have to, well, they don't have coal anymore, but when I volunteered there, they had coal to heat their firehouse. It was crazy. Even in, I mean, so that's a different thing. Good experience. But yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of good things happening right now. I think the biggest thing we need are resources like House Bill 759. It isn't going to solve the problem necessarily, but as Representative Barr mentioned, it's a tool for us. The two representatives that got this thing rolling, it's something that can help provide a little bit of income to help offset the cost of providing emergency services. So again, whether you're in the rural parts of Pennsylvania or areas where I'm at, that makes a big difference. If you're talking $5, $10, $15, $20, $25,000, that means a lot. At Berwyn specifically, we've been a net negative operating budget the past 5 years. A lot of that is driven by our need to increase our paid staff at our agency. We ran a little over 900 fire calls last year and over 2,200 EMS calls just at our station alone. Radnor Fire Company is very similar. Paley Fire Company, which is just to our west, is very similar to us. We're all facing these similar challenges, but eventually we need more funding. We are working very hard at the local level. We come here today and look to you to keep doing things like this that can help us sustain ourselves and keep providing the services that we want to as best we can to the community. So that's really it. But I appreciate your time. I know the group appreciates your time, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Veterans Affairs and Emergency Preparedness Committee for your time and consideration in hearing this testimony today regarding House Bill 759. My name is Chief Andy Hegedus, and I'm the Borough of Troop appointed fire chief. Borough of Troop, Pennsylvania is celebrating its Quaski Centennial this year, and I wanted to get that into the record because people thought it was a made-up word. It's actually our 125th anniversary. We are in Lackawanna County. I'm represented by the Honorable Freshman Kyle Mullins of the 112th District, who is a very strong supporter of our emergency services in Lackawanna County. Our borough had operated 3 independent fire companies for over 122 years, and we recently fell victim to one of the fire companies closing because of a lack of membership, directly attributed to members not being able to commit the time to run fundraising activities and spend time raising money. I know you hear that all the time, and it's just as hard for you to hear it, I'm sure, as it is for us to hear it. We still maintain 2 volunteer fire companies that operate independently, but I am appointed by council to oversee the operation and budgetary concerns of these 2 companies. I have over 40 years in the fire service. I'm a 10-year prostate cancer survivor this September the 18th, and I'm proud to sit here not knowing what the root cause of my cancer was, but I've been told presumably it could be from my early years of serving in the fire service. So I stand here with the great honor of having been a cancer survivor. Our borough averages over 350 calls yearly, and I have the exact same fundraising efforts as my brother fire chiefs here today. Our members share the same pain. The biggest complaint today is from the fundraising side that we're raising funds to pay the utility bills to keep the doors open to provide emergency services to the community. That's first and foremost before we get into the tools, equipment, and apparatus and things that we need to do our job. The Borough of Troop is approximately 5 square miles. As of the 2010 census, there were 4,088 people, estimated 1,700 households. I'm optimistic that in the 2020 census, we'll be well over 1,975. We've had a major new home explosion in the community through some developments and people investing in the community. The median income for our household for the borough is $34,000. So for us to continually to go to the well and asked people to make a $30 donation to support emergency services, especially when there were 3 independent companies. It's like serving 3 masters. Do I press the red button, the green button, or the blue button? Who do I make my donation to? It's been compressed a little bit now with the 2 agencies. I have some very serious target hazards in my small community, believe it or not. You wouldn't think it in the beautiful northeast section of the state here. We have the largest sanitary landfill in the state of Pennsylvania. The Keystone Sanitary Landfill is in Troop and Dunmore. They're in the process of going through DEP reviews, and with the expectation that they will be granted their permit from a selfish perspective of, that is the main source of revenue for our municipality. As a small municipality as we are, we have a $5.6 million operating budget. We have a lot of public services that the borough residents and businesses have grown accustomed to and have been a concern of. And we're impacted by that along with the borough of Dunmore. Adjacent to that, we have over 2 miles of 16-inch hydrogen sulfide pipeline that runs from the Keystone Sanitary Landfill to the power processing plant in Archibald, Pennsylvania. And on March the 23rd of this year, we had a subcontractor who failed to follow the rules of Pennsylvania One Call 811 and hit the 16-inch hydrogen sulfide line. And for those, H2S hydrogen sulfide, very toxic. Limited concentrations up to 700 parts per million can kill you. And this is the result of methane gas created in the landfill. And that we have actually 2 miles that comes from Keystone, but there's an additional 4 miles that comes from the Alliance landfill and Taylor. And until recently, we never had an issue, but it'll get your attention when that methane gas is coming out of the ground. We also have the largest chocolate purveyor in the world, Barry Callebaut, that just recently purchased the Gertrude Hawk family-owned business. Barry Callebaut is a Canadian company, and we have some sugar silos on the property. Believe it or not, in downtown Troop, Pennsylvania, we have sugar silos. So that's another concern. We also have, and I know the list just keeps on growing here of impactful things, but we were the site of one of the largest Superfund sites in the history of the EPA, the Marjal Gould Battery Plant. That was remediated during the 80s and it has been given a clean bill of health by DEP and EPA, but there is still a stigma that's associated with that. And that's a major portion of real estate in the community that doesn't allow for expansion and growth and is restricting tax dollars to come in and have businesses support the municipality. We also have a small portion of the Lackawanna Valley Industrial Highway, which is also named in honor of our late great Governor Robert P. Casey. It's known as the Robert P. Casey Highway. We have twin bridges on that. The highway sits atop the mountain on the eastern side of the town, and since its opening over 20 years ago, we've had over 25 fatalities on that stretch of land. So we're busy on highway rescues and things of that nature. We have Interstate 81, Interstate 84, Interstate 380, State Route 6, Dunmore, State Route 347. Believe it or not, in this small town of 5 square acres, all these crossroads come through there. And those are some of the current major challenges that I look at. Additionally, we're on the other side of the fire service. We're growing in memberships. I have a successful junior program. A person taught me a long time ago in the Boy Scouts, and I'm not eliminating the female firefighters because we have 3 junior female firefighters under the age of 16. But they said if you could get them before they smell alcohol or smell gasoline, we'll get them involved in the fire service. So we need a bigger facility. House Bill 759 would greatly assist in the recovery of material costs, specifically for out-of-town traffic that's using the roads, and in no way compensates us back for those services. And again, I'm not going to reiterate about there's only so many chicken barbecues and fun drives we could host. I thank you for allowing this time to present and discuss my concerns and challenges, and I strongly support and encourage you all to support House Bill 759. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today and address House Bill 759. My name is Scott Rhino. I actually have a unique perspective and background. I spent the last 35 years in fire and EMS, pretty much at all levels. 16 years as a fire chief, an educator, and provider, both on fire and EMS. And I've served on both the volunteer and career side. I also have the opportunity of what I do currently through Cornerstone and Mini Systems. I'm involved in the actual billing function of these types of claims, as well as I do consulting work with fire and EMS companies all across the Commonwealth at this point. And one large project I have going on right now is in Franklin County, Pennsylvania, a very rural part of the state, 18 fire companies there. And we're doing a study to try to determine the future of fire and EMS in that area. And one of the things that always comes back to, of course, is funding. And how do you get more funding? What do you do? And, you know, unique to this right now that we haven't talked a lot about is mutual aid services or automatic aid services, where you heard Chief Kaiser from Lancaster talk about where his rescue may get called out in a situation where somebody doesn't have that. And, you know, as we all know, and as we're speaking about here today, that all costs money. And as each municipality is being asked to fund more money to their individual fire EMS companies, one of the interesting challenges that I'm running into is if you're municipality A and your fire company is asking you to fund more money, but a lot of your fire company's responses are to go to assist municipality B, because again, maybe they're the ones that have that specialty service. Well, how does that work in terms of funding? Because now you're potentially funding money to support the citizens of the neighboring municipality, which, you know, certainly no municipalities are indicating they don't want to provide that service. They absolutely want to protect the citizens and provide the service. But where's the fair or equitable funding mechanism when that happens? So something like House Bill 759 here, it begins to address that as to how those mutual aid, how billing could be done, who would be responsible, and how that would be addressed. And I think that in and of itself could go a long way to the mutual automatic aid, because as we've heard here today, that's becoming more and more of an issue. You know, I know in Lancaster County, where I started in my volunteer career, in my borough in Columbia, we never used to use mutual or automatic aid because we had enough of our own fire trucks and enough of our own volunteers. We didn't call for help until it was a really big fire. Today, we call for help automatically because we don't have as many fire trucks and we don't have as many people, so we have to do that. So as we all know, times are changing. I don't think there's going to be one solution to funding. SR 6 is a great document and a great start to beginning to address these issues. And as I've spoke to the municipalities and indicated to them, it's going to take a lot of efforts coming together, such as this, but has been addressed here today. Fundraising is declining. Available people to man the fundraising is declining. So we can all add 2 and 2 there and realize we're not getting 4 anymore. So it's time for change. And I think some of what this bill will help to address, you know, there's a number of challenges that the fire companies face right now when they go to bill. First and foremost, a lot of times they're being asked to have an ordinance from their municipality that is, quote, authorizing them to bill. That's putting some undue challenges because now the fire company's got to figure out how to create that, or the municipality has to pay their solicitor to create that. That takes months to advertise and go through public hearings and so forth, when the municipality has already recognized the fire company as their provider of these services. So I think this ordinance will help to streamline the ability to bill. get some standardization to the billing in terms of rates and who gets billed and how. I can tell you right now, I see a number of different things across the Commonwealth in terms of charges, how it's done, what information is gathered. So this will help to standardize that. It will also put some validity to the sharing of information. I run into police departments, nothing against our brothers and sisters in the police. I understand their work as well, but they're in some cases reluctant to, I don't really know if I should share this personal insurance information and so forth with you. There's some HIPAA concerns get raised, things like that. So I think some of those things can be put to rest in this bill. So as was alluded here to today, obviously we can negotiate on some language to make this the best possible bill that we can. But I think it's time to move forward with something like this as a help to everyone in the Commonwealth. And I think it's a great tool to share the cost appropriately as we all provide individual, mutual, and automatic aid. So appreciate the opportunity to speak today and the opportunity that you folks are taking this issue on, and we can begin this discussion. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes our panel. I'm not sure if you want to ask any questions. The only other feedback that we've received through our organization, and again, I've met and talked with many of you. Again, this bill specifically addressed volunteer fire companies. However, the changes in Pennsylvania, some of the smaller third-class career city fire departments would benefit from this type of bill. And the changing in the shifting in some suburban areas, moving toward combination departments, as long as we cover the different types of fire departments that are going to be in Pennsylvania. But with that, we're completed with this.
Thank you. As far as we've heard a lot from you about SR 6, okay, when we come back into session next month, we will have quite a few bills that we've basically set up to move. That list isn't finalized yet. We're hoping to see a very comprehensive list of bills coming out that will help you with the. So I didn't want you to think it was a forgotten. In the past, these studies have been done and been forgotten. We do have quite a lengthy list of bills that we intend to move. We have a commitment from our leaders that these bills will be. Taken seriously and presented to the floor for a vote. Okay, so don't think that we forgot about you on that. To the members out there that want to ask questions, either let Mike know that you want to, or Rick or Sean that you have questions to ask, that you want to be put on the list of members that want to ask questions. I have a couple questions. Chief Grimm, you said you had a fire tax in your community. Okay, can you tell us what percentage it is, and then maybe what percent of your budget it helps to fund?
Sure. Our fire tax is based on local property tax millage. So currently, we're actually getting ready to negotiate a new contract with our borough and township, but we're currently at 0.85 mil. We were for 20 years at 0.47 mil, and finally got a little bit of an increase here recently. And that covers, I would bet, 95% of our budget right now. But like everyone else, we're struggling. We have over $100,000 worth of air packs that are just about to be expired. We have an engine that's almost 20 years old that we need to do something with. We have an aerial apparatus that's going to cost us probably at least $1 million to replace. So while the tax funding's great and supplies a lot of our needs as far as day-to-day operations, we still have all those different large capital expenses from time to time that crop up that become a challenge even with tax funding.
Do any of the other chiefs here, do you have fire taxes in your community? You're the only one with a fire tax currently? Okay. What's that? No. Most don't have them. No. Chief Nelson, you said you currently bill. What is your success rate, and what amount of dollars does it bring into your community?
Currently, we're at $100,000 for 1 year as time period for doing that. It's been pretty successful for us, being that we have a large diameter of highways and stuff like that, which is majority of our income that we're generating back. The other thing is when structure fires come out, that's where you seem to pick up a lot of income off that as well. We have several apartment complexes and stuff like that, and that's where we generated the vast amount of money from.
Have any of the other communities departments been successful in collecting or billing, or collecting? If you do bill, have you been successful at it?
We bill just strictly for motor vehicle accidents in 2018.
Yeah, we can't hear.
We bill strictly for motor vehicle accidents. I'm trying to find here. 2018 brought in $20,000. And the reason we bill only for motor vehicle accidents is we feel that those are people that are transient through our area, and they're not donating to us on a regular basis. We don't necessarily feel right about billing our citizens that we are serving, and yet we also are aware of the fact that the insurance companies do set aside money within their policy that cover for emergency services, and we're not seeing that money. So this, again, I think the bill would help with that situation.
Okay. I would ask our two prime co-sponsors here if they would like to start out with some questions. Go ahead, Representative Dush.
Yes, Mr. Grimm, Chief Grimm. One of the things you brought up was about the billing and how the practice would be, and the intent of this, and which is why it's at the end of the bill here. The Office of State Fire Commissioner shall establish fee guidelines in accordance with the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act. Basically, the way that we're already doing it for federal disaster responses is the way that the fire departments will go about doing their billing. It'll be a similar manner, and forward that on to the insurance companies. There's stability. Somebody else addressed the possibility of, a difference in rate schedules and that kind of thing. The equipment usage, all that is already set out in the federal guidelines. So that is the purpose of having this final paragraph in the bill.
Thank you.
Good. Representative Josuak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Grimm, you commented on your millage tax is 0.85% or mills.
Correct.
So you're pretty much of an urban area, is that right?
We're still considered a rural area. We have about 6,000 people between the borough and the township, which has steadily been decreasing. We have a lot of the younger folks moving out to those areas, and we do cover a large amount of rural area farmland and everything like that. I have been in contact with some of our other local fire chiefs up in our area who have very little. We have one neighboring department where their carnival that they have during July, that's all they get for the entire year. That's what they make to cover everything, apparatus, bills, you name it. So this would be a very large help to a municipality such as that. Ours maybe not so much because we are fortunate enough to have a tax, a fire tax. We're one of the very few in the upper county area, Upper Dauphin area.
So can you tell me why you didn't go to a flat tax? And the reason I'm asking that is because the district that I have a lot of dairy farmers, horse farmers, chicken farmers. They have 100 acres. Then you have a person that has a house with 1 acre.
Right.
The farmer's paying more than the guy that has a single house. So how do you balance that out?
I can't really speak to that. That was came about in 1996, which I wasn't a member at that point, so I'm not entirely familiar with why or how they used property tax. I think it might have been just a way of compromising with the borough and the township as opposed to going through a flat tax that they would have to administer more. That'd be my only guess.
Do any of you know any other departments that have a flat tax?
I just know of some departments in the Erie County area that use the EIT, that the $52. That's what they don't give. They give the basic funding for the workers' comp and some things in the township, but in the Erie County, they use that $52 that they give to the emergency services.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Culver.
Good afternoon. I want to thank the panel first and foremost for being firefighters and volunteers. I always say it takes a level of bravery that the rest of us just don't have. You're the only ones who will run towards the disaster or the crisis, and the rest of us are trying to get out. So thank you for that. I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. So currently, I know some of you said you bill if you go out like at the scene of an accident, but I know our fire companies are also responding to, we have a lot of flooding issues, quickly helping us close the roads, redirecting traffic, also rescuing people that are stuck in their homes. Would you also be billing for services like that as well?
Currently, there's no way to bill for that unless the accident was caused by, for instance, a motor vehicle accident hit a water main and flooded that area. That would be the only way that we could go about trying to recover any type of fees for that.
So this bill won't allow you to do that, though? Okay, that was just, I was trying to figure out who you would bill, I think
The
is
only
where I
thing
was.
our department bills for is structure fires and motor vehicle accidents. Somebody
Right.
that has insurance that's capable of taking care of it.
Okay.
I think the official term they try to find is called responsible party.
Right.
Once they try to identify a responsible party that caused the incident. Now, I know in California, there's a lot of issues going on with the electrical utilities right now that cause the wildfires. And the courts in California have ruled that the electrical utilities are responsible for, certain wildfires and are financially responsible for that.
Okay. All right. So in the case of we have multiple responders, and I'm in a pretty rural area of the state, and I mean, it's police, it's fire. I mean, we always have multiple. Would everybody be able to bill the same, or would that be like a sliding scale as to who arrived first, or the duties that were performed during, providing the service?
I think that was kind of identified in there that they would cooperate in billing.
Right.
Now, again, there would have to be some administrative procedures set up ahead of time. Usually, some fire departments have automatic aid or mutual aid agreements on, who's going to do what, and I'm sure there needed to be, like, for example, this is done in the hazardous materials community throughout Pennsylvania. Whenever there's a hazmat, it's billed through the county hazmat team. Fire departments ultimately assist the hazmat team on a lot of these incidents, and if they supply an engine, they're going to get $400 and something like that. Anybody else have anything on?
So just a few more questions, if you can
take your
indulge me.
time.
Okay. Multiple times we've heard you say, and it's the same issue, and it's not just with fire companies. I think it's with your Kiwanis Club, your Rotaries, all your associations. A lot of them are moving to doing meetings, on Skype or on the computers, or so they're not physically showing up. You don't have that same opportunity. You have to show up. So I get the problem with volunteers. Do you think this in any way will help attract or retain volunteers?
I think it just depends on the organization. If they, we could, for example, we could develop our own stipend program if you brought in $10,000, and some organizations have their own programs set up right now that they fund through other means. But maybe that's something they would do potentially with this. But I think it just depends on the organization and what the need is at the time. I know for us, where I'm at, it's going towards paid staff, 100%.
Go ahead.
And in other places, it's, again, when it comes down to that fundraising and looking at that, if this relieves some of that fundraising, the best way to recruit a volunteer is someone personally asking. That's the best way to recruit a volunteer. And organizations have to be a little proactive in doing that. And there's multiple ways of doing it, that family environment, that environment of bringing people into the station to, this is a profession that, we see people at their worst every day. People call the fire department when things are going bad, and it takes a special person to do that. But it comes down to the leadership of the organization, building a culture that allows for, we're going to do positive things for the community. A lot of times when I met with Chief Darrell from Garden Spot, they have truly a still community volunteer fire company in Lancaster County. When I talk to my colleagues in Chester County, it's going a different direction. As we talked in northern Pennsylvania, there's still community volunteer fire companies. Unfortunately, what's happening is the demographics are against us. As the population gets older and the population decreases, that heavy lift of a firefighter, that's a physically demanding role that needs to do that. So multiple things going on, lots of good things, but there is challenges. This would relieve, again, that effort of fundraising a little bit.
So one more question. For the companies that are currently billing, is it a burden on the fire company to have someone do the billing? Because sometimes when you're billing with insurance, it can become fairly complicated, or do they have to hire somebody outside to help with that part of it?
I think that many of the companies are hiring an outside party, not all. Some do it on their own. You know, the process obviously starts with they have to gather the information in some form. Many times at this point that's on paper, you know, as opposed to on the EMS side, we're kind of using tablets and all kinds of different commercial software programs and so forth to do that electronically, link that up and so forth. Most of that's not occurring yet in fire department billing because, again, there's just not the streamlined system and the money that's there and all those things. It would be nice to get it there because one of the challenges you do have as well that I do get from some companies is, okay, well, you want me to do this as a potential source of revenue, but now this is more work for me. I have to train my volunteers to do this. I have to request them to get this information. Somebody's got to file it. Somebody's got to do this, and the list goes on. And then they begin to look at currently is, well, what is my rate of return? And as the one chief here indicated, right now your rate of return can be very specific to a given area. If you're an area that runs all those interstates and so forth where you get a lot of vehicle accidents and you may have, well, you're going to have probably a more lucrative return. If you're out in a very rural area, you know, I have some of those companies saying, well, we run 3 vehicle accidents a year. You know, if that's what we're going to bill for, that's not going to, you know, till we do all this work, is it really going to be worth it? Okay. So that's back to the validity of building a system, having a bill, having the fire commissioner involved, it was alluded to, and having these things laid out in a better process.
Okay. Thank you for indulging me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Representative Dush.
Thank you, Chairman. Scott, you brought up about the mutual aid. Our companies are purposely working together, and like we've got a couple that have brush trucks, and we've got a couple that have ladders and that kind of stuff. But they tie themselves together with these mutual aid agreements just to have that kind of efficiency. And I want to thank you for bringing it up because in fact, we have some fire department members in my district that are members in more than one fire company. Sure. They'll be working in one community and living in another, and if the alarm goes off, they'll respond to whichever one is closer or whichever one needs the case or needs the assistance. So it's those kinds of efficiencies, and if we end up losing those, the thing for the insurance industry is if we start losing that, they're going to end up losing more money because it's going to take longer to respond to house fires and industrial fires, and you're going to lose millions of dollars. The potential liabilities, I think, for the insurance companies are going to be even larger. So one thing I would like to bring up, too, is, Jerry, perhaps getting a student intern to come in and maybe write that software, a college intern that would write the software for the fire companies. I think it might be a good idea, that it would be a great resume builder for them so that they could actually use the Stafford rates as a template. I think it would be a great benefit to all the fire companies because, like you said, they don't sign up to do paperwork. They sign up to respond. And I think that might be something that would cut down on the paperwork for them and make it a lot easier to submit.
Absolutely. Great idea.
Okay, thank you, Representative Dush. Representative Rigby.
Thank you, Chairman. Jerry, thank you. Gentlemen, thank you. I'm in full support of the bill. I know when we were talking SR6, we had discussed firefighters and volunteers, and we're not volunteers, we're all firefighters, and I fully buy that. A question of concern would be when we start this billing process, are the insurance companies going to have a pushback when they see the header that says volunteer on it? And I'm wondering, do we need to start using a different mindset even with our volunteers, and maybe we pull that title out of our organizations so that we don't get that pushback from the insurance companies and the others that look at us as free gratis, that they're getting us for nothing. And I think we've got to change that mindset. The firemen that are out there today go through hours and hours of training, whether they're receiving a paycheck or not. And I agree that the firefighters are firefighters, and they're all professional in my mind. So I'm just wondering if we need to start moving away from the title of volunteer and take that stigma out of it.
Yeah, again, those definitions, I totally agree with you. And, in other pieces of legislation and other things that we're working on, we've been working very well with all of the other organizations. And again, I agree, absolutely.
Representative Seppi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to echo my colleagues' thanks to all of you for what you do every day, and I'm so appreciative and in awe of the running into, like Rep. Culver says. It's just amazing, so thank you. One of the things that I hear when I talk to our fire companies in Chester County is actually housing affordability, and so I'm interested in how this might impact your ability to provide some housing. I know some companies have just sort of a built-in ability to do this. We have one fire company with Westchester University, so they can get or adjacent to the campus, that is able to provide some housing for young volunteers. And so they get the housing, they can volunteer, they get a break on their tuition. It's a great situation. But obviously, throughout the rest of the district, we can't do that. And one of the things I hear from a lot of our chiefs in Chester County is that the cost of living is so high for young people that they can't afford to live in the area and volunteer. And if they do volunteer and live outside of the area, the cost of responding to an incident is also costly. So would billing increase your ability to provide affordable housing or any sort of resource reimbursement for young volunteers?
Anybody want to answer? Good.
I'll answer that. So the program you're referring to, commonly referred to in the fire service, is what we would call a live-in program, where members come to the firehouse and live typically for free in exchange for going to calls. So in relationship to one of the other questions earlier, there is some of these things begin to all come together, because what happens is, if I'm a station now where I have a live-in program, but I do heavily fundraising, as we've talked about, many companies do. And I've had this personal experience with some stations. So now you want to come as a live-in firefighter, and so I tell you that, oh, but by the way, every Tuesday and Thursday evening we play bingo. You are expected as a live-in firefighter to be there every Tuesday and Thursday night to be my free bingo help. Well, now that person says, oh, wait a minute, that's not really what I signed up to do. I signed up to be a volunteer firefighter. I didn't sign up to be bingo help, okay? I understand the organization who tries to mandate them to do that because, again, they got to run the bingo program. They got to raise the funds. So it all comes back to, at the end of the day, to funding. So I can tell you that organizations that do not have to do any fundraising or have to do very minimal fundraising are normally significantly more successful with those types of programs. So I think bills like this do affect that, because if funding is found in other sources versus heavily fundraising, it will support those types of programs. So I think it is all related.
One thing I would just add, so my paid capacity at Radnor, we have volunteers and paid staff. about a year ago, so we are leasing an apartment. So we have 2 volunteers that are in that apartment. We're looking to expand that program to get a couple additional apartments along Lancaster Avenue, nearby where the station is. Obviously, you understand, closer the volunteers are, the quicker we're getting those trucks on the road. So yeah, I mean, this would be something, depending on what would be generated, we could possibly put towards getting additional apartments that are reasonable close to the station. Berwyn, in my volunteer capacity, we have a couple properties we own, but some we're focused on are, trying to modernize our station, which is from 1929. And we have used that at varying times the last few years to put volunteers in there. So we could possibly direct some of that funding into there for, property upkeep and things like that. The one thing I didn't mention earlier, we have a very tight partnership with TE School District already, and you're very familiar with where Conestoga High School is. They let the kids leave class for calls. We have almost, I think the last 3 years, almost 15 volunteers out of Conestoga High School. We've lost a couple of them just because they go to college and maybe they get distracted with other things, or they get into a major that's very intense. But we're very fortunate to have a good partnership with them, and we keep building and building that. But we appreciate you bringing that up.
Just one thing to add to that, I do know several fire companies that have purchased properties in the Williamsport area. They use those not only for rental income, but they have their firefighters housed at those properties.
Chairman Sinato.
Thank you, Chairman Burton. Thank you for your testimony. I do just have one quick question. I know that you talk about fundraising, and I know you've got some diverse communities out there. And where I'm from, they do a lot. It's that ox roast dinner and spaghetti dinner, and we still have some bingos, but a lot of bingos, they're not doing it anymore because of the casinos. Has that had an effect on your fundraising, I think, with what's happened with casinos?
I do know that in the chiefs that I do talk to, that is correct. Yes.
And same in my capacity, I have certainly dealt with organizations that have shared they have actually went out of the bingo business related to casinos. That they saw their business decline to the point where that, some shared they were breaking even at best, so you're working this event for hours on end to break even. Obviously not a good business proposition, so I
bring that up because, that used to be a major fundraiser.
Correct.
For many, especially in the rural communities, and with the addition, with the casino gaming and everything, I've seen, most of our bingos at the fire halls they're not doing it anymore.
You're correct.
And you've got to find another source, and you can only do so many ox roast. A bingo was a weekly money generator at one time. That brought in a lot of revenue.
Absolutely. And we know that in certain areas of Pennsylvania and in a lot of areas, it's not going to be just a fire tax. It's not possible. You have to have that diverse. Organizations have to become more entrepreneurial. And when you look at that pie chart, when you're looking at a budget, you got to look at different methods of fundraising and become a little more unique. And again, that requires a whole administrative structure to do. You are correct.
And every community is different. I've seen it. We've traveled. Our committee's been very active in the state. We've worked with different areas. You have some wealthy communities. If you send a fundraising letter out, people write big checks. In the more rural communities, they write a $10 or $20 check, not a $1,000 check. So I'm saying, that there've got to be some funding mechanisms out there. And I think as a committee, I think we always try to look at ways of helping. So thank you for your testimony today.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Gillen.
One thing, my friends from Lancaster County, relative to mutual aid, I'm in Five Pointville, Bowmansville, so I appreciate that. In Southern Berks County, thank you for saving the Commonwealth about $6 billion a year with your volunteerism. We can't do without you. Two brief questions. One, you can just kind of nod your head and move around on. The new fireworks law, increasing call volume and problems out there. Okay, yes. We're getting...
Yes.
Okay, more up and down than sideways. All right. Relative, and I don't want to sound like a contrarian on this, but it's a legitimate question. We go to chicken barbecues. We do the breakfast. the hoagies. There's a French fry stand. I'm afraid I would starve to death if there still isn't some of that. All right, but in all seriousness, is there not a point at which we could say there's some engagement with the community, illicit volunteerism, exposure to the station? I think it's ridiculous that 60%, I've read some studies, that available hours are going to the fundraising. Is there a sweet spot that we can land on and say, still like to do some of this to open the station up, but 60% is outlandish?
Well, I can tell you, Representative, that our biggest event of the year is Super Bowl Sunday. This will be our 15th year that we've done a Super Bowl Sunday Wing Fest. Last year we did in excess of 1,600 fresh pounds of wings, which was about over 1,000 orders in a 5-hour window. We've invested in the kitchen equipment and all the things that are needed for that. It's actually become the strongest family day for our membership, that we work from 6 a.m. till the game starts and enjoy camaraderie in that. And sometimes we fall a little behind on orders, but the community is there, and nobody gets upset that they're waiting in line for wings, because it's the one time of the year they see each other. So the community comes to this event, supports it, and we would never do away with that. We continue to have a strong presence with the night out programs in our community, our open houses, our fire prevention programs in the schools, and things of that nature that just can never go away. And occasionally we do put the bucket on the table and say, we could use your support and donations, and we get that. We can never, ever, in a community of our size, do away with those annual fundraisers or events that have become a staple of the community. Super Bowl Sunday, it's the only day of the year we do this. People are asking us to do it 4 or 5 times a year. I said, no, it's a one-time-a-year thing. We try to make it a big, big deal, and it has become that. You wouldn't believe it, but the margins are very small on chicken wings, so there's not a lot of revenue that comes with that. But we've looked at it from the perspective that it brings the membership together and the community closer together, which results in a happier community. And when they write out their check for the fund drive, we're trying to get above that 20% take rate on the donations, because we just can't seem to get a lift above that 18 to 20%. And we use a third-party firm to send out our letter and our fund drive. We do it for auditing purposes, and we also do it that it's clean and consistent year in and year out. And we notice I'm able to identify people that are giving more, giving less, or not giving, and then try to dig into that a little bit and find out what are the issues that are stopping them from donating and supporting.
So there is a sweet spot. We're not talking all or nothing. That's reassuring. The base of my food pyramid is wings and French fries.
Yeah, like Jerry said before too. This isn't gonna. There and Scott, that are many municipalities. This isn't like hitting the Powerball for them at all. House Bill 759. It's not gonna solve all the problems.
As I said earlier, times have changed, and there needs to be that community. The firehouse was the center of the community, and people come in to see who you are, what you're doing, and interact with the community. I think fire departments still need to do fundraisers, but need to find that niche, unique thing. Everybody does chicken barbecues. I live in Lancaster County on the eastern side. Every Amishman has chicken barbecue, so you can get chicken barbecue anywhere, and you can get it cheaper. Years ago, New Holland Fair, the fire department always had the oyster stand. We sold fried oysters, and I loved it because I love fried oysters, and I did lots of quality control while I was frying oysters. But we figured out, we had a guy that chaired that thing. He took a week's vacation, and there was 4-hour shifts for three days, 4-hour shifts. We're constantly getting texts. Hey, we need another guy. We need 5 people to staff the stand tonight. It gets frustrating. We did the calculation, and guys were making, for all the man hours, we were making less than $3 an hour. So it's not worth it. Now, one of the things that we did when we went away from the stand, we still have a presence at the New Holland Fair. We take an engine up there. We stand out. We interact with the community. We talk to people. We're there if somebody has a medical emergency, or if there is a fire in the fair. area, which is hard to access. So we're trying to get that balance. But I think the fundraisers, they need to find their niche, no different than the Amish companies that border my first dude that have mud cells and make millions of dollars. But that's their niche thing. I can't do that. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One thing I'd like to add in there is that I don't think House Bill 759 is going to replace fundraisers or anything like that. But in the same aspect, our volunteer firefighters training has gone slowly downhill. There's no minimum standards throughout the state to say that a firefighter is a firefighter. It's something in SR 6 that we're looking at. And I hear that we're worried about, fundraising, but we're not worried about the training. And the training is going to get our firefighters killed. And if we're more focused on chicken dinners and everything else, I think we've lost the point of where we're supposed to be. We need to be worried about our training, not worried about fundraising for our fire departments to do the job to take care of us. And that's where I feel we need to be.
Great, thank you. Representative Ryan.
Y'all do a great job. I tell you what, I'd love to serve with you in the Marine Corps one day. One of the things that surprised me, and I'm supportive of the bill as well, I was surprised in my community, though, with some blowback I got about the bill, but had nothing to do with you guys. It had to do with the fact that the MS4 charges are coming in. And if you're not familiar with that, these are stormwater management fees. And the anger level that's coming out about what's municipal government doing and why are we coming up with all these fees? And then they said, is this Bill 759 step 2 in this process of let's a fee for service for everything, and we'll just start sending checks to municipal government and nothing happens? How do you answer that? Because I'm worried because I think we need to get you all relief. We need to do this. But is there something that we need to do to really fix the entire system? Or if we've been kludging things together for so long that we've got a mess that you're now dealing with and we're expecting you to clean up with? I do want to echo the comment about the wings and the barbecue chicken. I think that'd be illegal if you attempt to stop it, and we'll fight that at every turn.
I guess, I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, if the state can, through the SR6 process, develop standards to cover, and Jerry, what do they call it to SR6? Levels of protection,
Levels of protection.
Basically, same levels of protection standard to cover. Yeah, how many people do we want arriving at a scene in a certain amount of time? How many personnel for rural, suburban, urban areas? And I think SR6 talked about offensive levels and things of that nature. Same type of thing. If that was more clearly defined within the law, a lot of what we're talking about here makes those decisions easier for the fire chiefs sitting with their local partners to say, hey, all right, we're at, we want to get a fire truck there, within 10 minutes, 80% of the time. I literally sat in a township meeting last night and they talked about what you just mentioned, MS4, unfunded mandates that have passed from the federal government down to the state, down to the local government. You're talking millions of dollars in my community for, to try to comply with that. And as you mentioned, and we're kind of off to the side here, like, hey, we're saving you, billions statewide, but individual, a lot of us are saving hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars individually. And we're like, well, what about us? We need to get this thing figured out. So I think a lot of what you said is right on the money. We are dealing with a mess, but we're here because we're trying to help you all and fix it.
Mm-hmm. Well, you all should be incredibly proud of the great job you've done for our community and for the volunteer efforts, and thank you so much. God bless you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Scott, I had a couple questions. I don't think anyone else has other questions. Any of the members? Okay. I think it was you in your testimony said that the townships some of the townships required an ordinance for billing. Was that you that said that? Okay.
Yes.
And what would be the reason not to want to support an ordinance to allow their fire companies to be able to bill if is that going to bring revenue?
I haven't experienced much of where they have been unwilling to support it.
Okay.
It's just simply the administrative burden of somebody's got to create it. So initially the municipality will say to the fire company, well, okay, what do you want us to adopt? Where is it? Fire company's saying, well, I don't write ordinances. I don't have a sample ordinance. So then it ends up where the Municipality has to discuss and decide, well, are we going to authorize and pay our solicitor to draft this ordinance? Then, because it's a municipal ordinance, obviously it has to get advertised and go through that whole process, so it takes a couple months. It usually gets done in the end, but it's a financial expense and a length of process till that all gets done. Not that they're against it, it's just an administrative process that I'm not sure why is necessary when that municipality has already recognized said fire company as their provider.
Right, that's what I'm wondering.
Mr. Chairman, I have something I'd like to add to that in response to Representative Rigsby's comment about making this a fire department rather than the volunteer fire service. There has become over in the Quaska centennial year of True Borough, 125 years of operation, there has always been a volunteer fire service. We recently had to go to a paid EMS provider because the volunteers just went out of business. So with that comes the stigma of you're a volunteer service. Why do you need to bill for these fees and these services, and who's doing what with the money? There's always these accusations that fly in small towns and municipalities that this one's doing this or this one's taking that. And unfortunately, we've seen some of that because of, there's not sufficient checks and balances put in place by organizations. Our own company is a 501c3 corporation, so we file a Form 990. But that checks and balances piece, and if we remove Troop Host Company number 1, Troop Host Company number 2, and Volunteer Host Company of Troop, and become the Troop Fire Department, now it's a level of respect. I think it's become. It's ultimately we have to bite the bullet and do that and change the perception of who we are. We have two neighboring companies, Scranton and Dunmore, that are both career fire departments. And like you said, there is no difference once the gear is turned on. Levels of training and things like that we've discussed. But that perception of removing that word volunteer is my aha for the session, and I thank you for allowing me to be here to hear that, because that's a big takeaway for me today.
Thank you, Representative Dush or Joswiak. How does your legislation speak to this issue as far as requiring an ordinance? Is it required in your legislation?
No, it's not required.
Okay. Good. All right. One last question, if I can. And maybe, Jerry, you can, I don't know if you could answer this for us. The firemen's relief funding that the fire companies get, have you seen that go, has it been going up or down?
Well, we've had lots of meetings on that lately, and we've talked a little bit. And I'm hearing a rumor that it may be going up, which is I'm thinking positively on that. I was told that from what we would hear from the Auditor General's office in mid-July. I have not heard anything back from them, but I have heard the rumor that it may be going up. But hopefully we'll be able to look into that soon because they have to certify it. Once the money from revenue is turned over to the Auditor General, there's a certification process. Then they take a bunch off for the pensions. Once that comes off, then they certify the number. And then by October, it's distributed to the municipalities, who then distribute it to the fire departments. But I have heard it, but we'll see. We'll find out.
I guess for the average volunteer fire company, what percentage of the budget does it represent?
It's significant. I believe the relief is significant. And obviously, the issues with, smaller, the formula-based stuff where smaller departments kind of, they piece together it. But, it is significant, that decrease that has hurt the departments. They have to change their budgeting and, maybe put off some expenditures. But, many of the departments use this for, number one, safety equipment, the bunker gear, the air breathing apparatus, and insurance. They use it for that, to get good insurance for their members. And for the firefighting training. They use that funding for firefighting training. So again, I know we are working on some things to modernize that Relief Association thing, but hopefully the rumor that I heard, maybe it's a bump this year. I hope so. So because it is a significant thing that the fire departments use relief. You guys have anything on relief, real quick, at all?
Our municipality uses relief strictly at this point to provide a life insurance benefit for every member that's been and is currently a member. And we buy a group life insurance policy from a third party. And unfortunately, over the last 3 years, our relief dollars have gone down. The premium has gone up because the census age has increased. One of our oldest members just passed away and lived to the very nice age of 94. Wow. So when you take that rising census with a lack of 18, 19, and 20-year-olds coming in, we're paying a higher premium. So we're really, this year, if we don't get a bump in our relief money, we're going to be upside down on our policy because the policy's costing us about $22,000 a year for about 140 members. So, and we pay out a $5,000 life insurance premium. We try to use that as part of a recruiting tool as well, that when you come on board, there's a lot of 21 and 22-year-olds that aren't even thinking about life insurance, and God forbid something were to happen even of natural causes, at least there's something there from the organization for them doing what they did, and double indemnity if it was in an accident.
Great.
So insurance is an extremely expensive proposition.
Great. One last question. Jerry, can you explain the ISO rating?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The ISO rating. That is, it traditionally has been, you have a lower number, ISO 1, you look at the city of Pittsburgh, Mount Lebanon, several of those type of communities, and that rates several things. It rates your water supply, your municipal water supply. It rates your alarm systems, which is your communication system, your 911 systems, and things like that. And number 3, it rates your fire department, and it bases upon the fire department's ability to pump water at 3,000 gallons a minute based upon a target hazard, blah, blah, blah. It also has to do with training of your fire department, the type of equipment that you have. So there's ratings between number 1 and number 10, which 10 means you have no fire protection in your township, borough, or whatever, 0 fire protection. Basically, in theory, the lower the number, the better insurance rates that you will have for your community. Okay. However, that has changed over the years, and not all insurance companies follow ISO. At least that's what I'm told by the experts in this. Anybody want to add to that? Did I explain that correctly?
Yes, very well. We, before I took over as chief 8 years ago, we had a rating of 5.9. And brought ISO in and said, hey, we've made these improvements to the infrastructure, additional apparatus, and things of that nature. Now we've gone down to what's called a 3Y, because they've dropped the 9. They've made some changes. But the word we're hearing on the street now is that the insurance carriers aren't recognizing ISO, because ISO has come up with this formula that they're looking at considering doing away with that ISO measurement. And when we went from a 5.9 to a 3Y, I literally had insurance agents across my borough and neighboring communities say, what the heck did you do to get a lower rating? Because now I've got to lower the premiums of your constituents and your residents in the municipality. And it said that's the kind of things we do as a public service back for the community, make sure we're on top of that. So that's, ISO is still an important piece in my municipality until they tell us that it's not going to be recognized anymore.
Very quickly, the ISO used to, it was one of those things where the lower the number, you're a better fire department, you've been able to do good things for the community and things like that. However, in the last 10 years, the performance, when you measure the performance of a fire department, it's moving more toward what they call the standards of accreditation across the United States. The ability to gather what's called an effective firefighting force on the scene within a certain period of time based upon the risk in your community. You could get 17 firefighters on scene in 8 minutes anywhere in the city of Harrisburg, okay? That's an urban area. It's the same thing with our third-class cities, but that's going to cost a lot of money. Okay, in a more rural or suburban area, you could set a standard that we want to have 5 or 8 or 9 firefighters on the scene within 13 minutes. So some places across the United States are measuring fire departments' performance based on that versus the ISO. Again, we don't discount ISO, but it's, what I'm hearing from experts is not everybody's using it anymore.
Okay. Jerry, thank you for putting an excellent panel together for us. We have to move on to our next speaker, but gentlemen, thank you all for taking your time to be here today. We greatly appreciate it. Our next panelist is Sam Marshall with the Insurance Federation of Pennsylvania. Tim, you can begin when you're ready, but I have one question for you when you're ready. So,
You can fire away right now.
hey, I just wanted to know how many nights of bingo do you have with the Insurance Federation to keep your doors open?
Well, that would describe a PAC fundraiser. So I guess in that sense, just about as many.
No chicken dinners or anything? I haven't been invited to one lately.
Well, you've been invited. Whether you've declined or accepted is a different matter.
That's right. Hey, thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me. Because we were here about 4 years ago on an identical bill. At that time, it was House Bill 1272. And our general concerns remain the same, but our questions and recommendations have evolved, in large part through discussions with many of you and your Senate colleagues. And as we've learned more, looking at the tax records and the report you issued last year pursuant to Senate Resolution 6. At the outset, we reiterate our support for volunteer fire companies and the value they provide to our policyholders and the communities. That was true when Ben Franklin founded America's first insurer as part of the volunteer fire company, and it remains true today, and it's true in action. A large portion of the insurance industry's premium taxes already goes to volunteer fire companies. We've also been leaders in fire prevention efforts, not just in legislative activities like supporting strong building codes and sprinkler systems, but in the communities themselves where we are major contributors to efforts such as supplying free smoke detectors. We recognize the challenges, and you heard from the panel before, that the volunteer fire companies face in financing and in recruiting and retaining qualified volunteers. In the past, we've recommended a comprehensive approach to better identify which fire companies need funding, which need more volunteers, which need improved equipment, and in all cases, how much is needed, because it isn't a one-size-fits-all problem or solution. And I think that's reflected in the recommendations in Senate Resolution 6. Turning to the bill, it does two things. It makes people responsible for the costs of fire companies unless the person has paid a tax to the fire company's municipality or has paid a subscription fee to the fire company, and it allows the fire company to bill insurers. As to what it doesn't do, it doesn't adopt any of the 27 recommendations in the SR 6 report. This was a recommendation from 2004, SR 60, that report, but it wasn't included in this one beyond saying that it'll mean more money, which SR 6 does recommend. Still, given that this bill has been a part of the debate, it's odd not to have been mentioned specifically in the SR 6 report. Second, probably most important for our purposes, it doesn't provide a secure and quantifiable revenue stream to individual volunteer fire companies that better enables them to meet the needs of their communities. We see the bill as providing more confusion than stable revenue for an individual fire company, and we don't see how it gets more volunteers. Third, it doesn't provide for even application and enforcement among fire companies and consumers. We're not sure how the exemptions will be handled or how a particular fire company will handle claims against local residents versus those from outside its municipality. You heard some reference to that earlier today. Will a fire company pursue all such claims, or only those dealing with non-residents, or only where there might be insurance, or only for the amount of insurance? Will that be solely within the fire company's discretion? And it doesn't mandate, and I really appreciate that we were invited here as insurers for comments on the bill, but just in the drafting of the bill, and I've been around the block on insurance bills of all shapes and sizes for a while, it doesn't mandate that insurers, whether they're auto or homeowner or property, whether it's personal or commercial, doesn't mandate that they cover it. It allows a fire company to bill an insurer. It doesn't require an insurance company to provide that coverage to our policyholders. I think you've faced similar issues and balances when you dealt with local police departments charging for emergency responses. You addressed that by passing Act 69 of 2007. That actually prohibited local police from doing this and noting the same issues we're raising today. We asked why the change here. Now, we realize that the financial problems of volunteer fire companies are real. We're not shrinking away from our commitment to them. Historically, that's been done through the dedication of a large portion of insurance premium taxes, those based on foreign fire premiums, with those taxes going to the Fire Insurance Tax Fund. We've heard that revenue has been declining, and proponents have said the bills needed to fix that. And it was, as noted in the panel before, There's a rumor, and I think it should be a fact, that that's going to be coming up. We noted that's part of recommendation 13 of SR6 in the SR6 report. We do think more analysis on that tax question is needed. Recommendation 13 said the revenue from this tax is declining, and that between 6 and 7 million fewer insurance policies were being subject to the tax in just the past 2 years. It suggested that that's because insurers are taking advantage of a loophole in that they self-report. I can tell you something's missing there. We've attached to our testimony a chart for the past decades, and it shows that the tax revenue here has been fairly consistent. 1 year was way up, and another, just the recent past, was down. But there's not a declining trend in that. And maybe that premium tax formula needs adjustment, but I don't know that you embark on a bill because of a flawed understanding of those tax revenues. We do hear the concern of local fire companies being called on to help with trucking accidents on I-80 or similar roads, and imposing burdens on the local companies that don't benefit their communities. That's a legitimate complaint. Don't know that the bill will address that. It isn't written, again, it isn't written as an insurance requisite, and even if it were, it wouldn't apply to a truck or a car registered and insured in another state. That opens a suggestion. We do have in Pennsylvania a pretty hefty gas tax. Why isn't some of that dedicated to this? I'd also look at vehicle licensing fees. Why aren't some of those dedicated to volunteer fire companies? I know there's been some legislative effort. We collect more. The state, I'm sorry when I think we, but the Commonwealth collects more in, for instance, MVR fees and the like than it uses. And there's been there's a bill saying, hey, let's start reducing that. You may want to consider, rather than just a pure reduction of that, dedicating some of that funding to the volunteer fire companies. I think it's particularly appropriate in things like an I-80 and the roads, the concern that you have there. I know, for instance, we as insurers have been paying for a number of years on motor vehicle records. We pay an added surcharge to PennDOT. It started at $2. It was supposed to be so PennDOT could upgrade its computer system. I believe the computer system is updated. I also know that the $2 surcharge remains in place. I have no idea where the money goes, but I'd recommend somebody take a look at it. And also on the tax revenue, that's how much goes into that fund. I can't tell you where the money goes from there. It's a little interesting, even in the year that was down, by our calculations, the fund generated, even in that off year, usually it's up in the 85 million zone, but that year, 2016-17, it was at 63 million. At the same time, we noticed the Auditor General had a press release, and with considerable fanfare, saying it was releasing 55 million to fire companies across the Commonwealth. I have no idea what happened to the remaining 8 million. You can see what we pay in taxes that are meant to go to volunteer fire companies. How much of that is apportioned to fire companies and where it goes is a legitimate question. And if there's some adjustment to that tax revenue, that makes a lot of sense. And I say because I talk about a consistent revenue stream. I think the tax revenue overall is fairly consistent. I would note from an insurance perspective, particularly when you're dealing with rural areas, how many claims you get in a given year can vary greatly. You may have 100 claims, you may have 300 claims, it may go down to 150 claims. It's hardly a static number. And to that end, I think that for any volunteer fire company, and frankly for any business, you actually want a more stable revenue stream. And I think the tax stream and perhaps some greater use of some of the licensing fee excess that we're seeing in Pennsylvania, that can produce a far more consistent and stable revenue stream. And you can have, as I think some of the people testified earlier on the panel, particularly in a rural area, there may not be many fire company calls. It's still an indispensable service. So it's not going to be for that rural fire. I live in a suburban area. You may get the critical mass that you need, frankly, where I live, within a mile and a half of my home, we have 3 fire companies. We may have a few too many. But in a rural area, they may not get that many calls, but they're absolutely indispensable. So in that sense, this sort of per claim billing revenue stream isn't going to be the answer. I think this is the type of service where you're better served through a broad-based, tax-based revenue source. And that's why we'd recommend that you look closely into that. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. These numbers you gave us, these are from the Department of Revenue?
Yes.
Okay, because of what was paid out and what you're saying here was collected are very different.
And Chairman, I don't know why that is. And I think that's probably behoove everybody to make that one of the first inquiries.
You don't think the fact that there are more companies out there being self-insured has something to do with this?
No, you know what? Because I think the bulk of this revenue comes from personal lines. And if you look, if you look over the last 10 years, I don't know what happened in the fiscal year 2010-11, where it went way up, and it went up, significantly for the monies that go to municipal pension aid, the municipal pension aid fund. But it's been overall fairly stable in that sort of, mid $80 million range. Could be more stable, but frankly, it's going to be those numbers there are a lot more stable than I think you'd get on a per claim basis in billings.
Okay. Thank you. Representative Dush.
Thank you, Sam, Chairman, and Sam, thank you. One of the concerns I had is a lot of the information you were presenting actually conflates the revenue streams from taxes and that sort of thing, whereas this is designed for a specific purpose, meaning that when a policyholder is paying for a carrier to do this, then the local fire companies have the ability to go against that, file that claim against what the person is already paying for, the insured. So to that end, I have a question as to when you said about out-of-state motorists not being covered under this. If the parent company is licensed to cover people who are traveling across state lines, how are they not liable to the same situation, or to having to pay?
Yes, sir. I believe, and that's why one of the things I mentioned is this bill isn't a mandate on insurance companies. Doesn't
Correct.
require
It
that your insurance
was never
policy
intended
cover
to
it.
be.
I don't believe most insurance policies cover volunteer services in that sense. And so what this bill, I mean, that's why I mentioned, you can say here, I mean, it's, some of the people before said, well, insurance companies, ostensibly provide this coverage and they're collecting premium for it, they're just not paying it out. I don't believe that's the case. I think that what you find is that in your general homeowner or commercial or auto policy, it doesn't cover these services. And so you could, now, that's why one of the things, I know we talked about it back in 2015 as well, you could revise this bill so that it's a mandate that all policies issued in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania cover services provided by volunteer fire companies. Then I guess you'd want to have, except if the policyholder paid a subscription fee, and I don't know what that amount would be. I mean, is it $20 a year? Is it $100 a year? Whatever it is. And you'd have to have some definition there. And except if the local municipality generated a tax. But that wouldn't extend to an auto policy that was issued in another state.
Well, I'm not looking at addressing the individual exemptions. I want the local municipal fire companies to have the flexibility to bill when you've got a small community fire company and you have people who are underinsured or whatever on their structure fire or whatever. The company doesn't necessarily want that negative blowback on the company by trying to bill the individual. I want them to have that kind of flexibility. Where the money has already been paid or there are premiums available, That is the intent. We want to be able to, if somebody's paying a premium to have this coverage, then the carriers should be mandated to have to pay for this. And in a lot of cases, what we're hearing is the carriers are slow walking some of this, or they're pushing back, using delaying tactics and stuff, to the point where with a volunteer fire company, it's just not worth it, that return on investment on time with somebody who, like I had said before, they sign up to be out there and respond and save people's lives. They don't sign up to be paper pushers.
Appreciating that, and one of the things, and I think those of you who've dealt with me know that I have absolutely no problem, bringing the wrath of God down upon insurance companies. I mean, I question them as toughly as anybody out there. I would suggest, but knowing claims people within our industry, nobody says, gee, let me pick a fight with a volunteer fire company, let me slow walk that claim. It's just not, there might be claims of which you're very wary about. This wouldn't necessarily be one of them. I think, and I'm happy to look into instances, and I'd welcome some, just give me a list of 10, and I'll contact the companies and see what's going on, because I think that the real problem is that, the real concern is that the policy itself doesn't cover the service being billed for. The one other thing that you touch on there that raises a question, look, an insurance policy covers it, and for whatever reason an insurance company says, I don't care if we say that we provide that coverage, I'm not paying the claim. Let me know that, and I'll do due diligence, and we'll correct that problem. But that's different than saying, hey, you know what, fire companies, you can bill the insurance company even if you wouldn't otherwise hold your resident responsible. We're going to bill if there's insurance, but we're not going to bill if there isn't. That does raise some questions. I mean, you can make us cover it, but if you're going to say, if you have insurance, then we go after you. If you don't have insurance, we don't. I think that's the type of uneven enforcement I'd be wary of, and that's why I'd suggest you'd be better off looking at tax revenues. And frankly, I would think from a volunteer fire company's perspective, rather than having to become, I realize it's a pain in the neck to do fundraising. I never hear anybody say, boy, is it a pleasure filing claims with insurance companies. You might be better served having it as a general revenue base.
Well, as I said before, we've had an 1,143 drop in median family income in my district. Now, when you're talking about increasing tax revenues, when most of the claims that we're going to hear about from the Pine Creek Fire Company, most of those expenses are coming from out-of-state operators.
Okay, I'm not talking about increasing tax revenue, and actually going to your point on out-of-state operators, which I am sensitive. I think that's where you can look at some of the gas taxes, because that is paid in part by the out-of-state users, and you may want to have a direct. You may want to have some dedicated funding from that. I also think that things like some of the fees that all of us pay to PennDOT, where they've been running at an excess, that might be a more stable, more consistent, and frankly larger revenue source.
Well, personally, I'd like to have the parties that are responsible for the accidents and the need for the payments and the responses. I'd rather have them do it than have to put the rest of the people on the hook for it.
And appreciating that, just for the interplay here, your challenge when you do that is always, okay, who is responsible? And then you get into, and that's where I think, in fairness to into a volunteer fire company, that can become more trouble than it's worth, because driver A says it wasn't my fault, and driver B says, yeah, it was. And then all of a sudden everybody's waiting on a he said, she said, and you get caught into that trap. So for consistent funding, it seems that might be better done for the social good. And it's in particular under this bill, and I think correctly, this bill says here you pay for the costs except for the labor. And determining those costs, as some people mentioned, whether you have 50 calls a year or 500 calls a year, you may need the same equipment. You may have those same operating costs. because you need that equipment to answer the needs of your community. Does that mean that in the area where you have 50 calls a year, the costs are a lot higher than where you have 500? Those are tough questions.
Sam, I know others are going to have questions. I'll circle back with you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Representative Ferry.
Thank you, and thanks for being here, Sam. Couple things. Although billing was not a recommendation in the SR6 report, and I said on that commission, in the appendix were a list of legislative priorities that we put together last session. We did include that, and I know from sitting on that commission, the representatives there are certainly in support of Representative Dush's legislation. A couple quick things. So when we actually talked about this 4 years ago, I thought there was written into some of the homeowners and automobile policies like a flat amount for emergency services, like a $500 fee that was written in of coverage for, fire response to a vehicle accident, vehicle fire, structure fire. So, but I thought you just said there actually isn't coverage for that.
I don't think it's uniform.
Okay.
I think in the past there have been, and that's almost been more for a contribution as opposed to, hey, this is what we'll pay for your liability. But it also goes into the question of, is your local municipality holding you personally responsible? And that gets into the question that we were just talking about with Representative Dush. It's one thing to say, hey, we'll bill you if you have insurance, but if you don't, we won't. Generally, as insurers, we cover the liability of our policyholder. If our policyholder isn't liable, we don't assume liability. And I think that's always been, one of the key challenges there.
Would you be able to talk to your main, State Farm, the members of your organization, your main insurers, and see if they do have that written into their policies?
Yeah.
And for vehicle, for homeowners, that would be great. I think part of the impetus of this bill, and I think we heard a little bit from the previous panel, is the costs that are incurred because of what we protect. So my fire department, we protect Interstate 95 and Route 1 Superhighway. Between the two highways, we're out there at least once a week. So not only are we on scene at accidents that could require a significant amount of time of investigation, which we're seeing they're burning fuel, but we're also throwing down oil dry. Representative Dush mentioned pigs. We're using all kinds of absorbent materials. And the person that's responsible for that accident, in most cases, is not somebody from our community that's either paying a fire tax or making a donation to our fire company, and we're actually incurring costs. The money we get from our local governments and our donations create a state of readiness for us. We have the fire trucks there, we have the gear, we have the equipment, and then when somebody actually has an at-fault incident, we'll use an accident as an example, we're incurring additional costs above and beyond that, and they're certainly not somebody that's funding our department. We would certainly love the opportunity, even if we can't recoup the hours for the apparatus, which would be great, we certainly wouldn't be able to recoup the actual expenditures from the equipment that was used that's expendable equipment. It's not like an air pack where the bottle's going to get refilled, it's going to go back on the truck, and we're going to use it next time. We're actually using a lot of expendable equipment, and the author of the bill can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's some of the costs that they're looking to recover. Additionally, when we go fight that house fire and the hose line ends up getting a hole in it, whether it got burned through or broken glass or whatever, they're very expensive to replace. And they're the kinds of items that I think we want to be able to bill for, just so we can recover the costs and get the equipment back on the truck. We obviously have spare equipment that we put on the truck in the meantime, but we do have to order more hose that are more oil dry. So I think that's part of where this is going.
And Representative, on that, as I mentioned, and I'll stress it again, we appreciate that. But understand that, particularly when it's on, anybody who's driven on I-80 knows, that tends to be where I've always run into that. But on the turnpike, it can happen on a toll road as well as a non-toll road, but an interstate. But that vehicle that may have caused the accident or been in the accident is just as likely to be out of state. It's a truck going through, or a motorist going through, as it's going to be in state. If you're dealing, even if you rewrote this bill to make it a clear insurance mandate, it wouldn't apply to a motorist from another state. That's why I think for that area, and I think that's a specific I mean, I realize there's a broader problem, but that's a specific subset of the problem. I do think that in particular, that's something where, you know, I mean, we had the second highest gas tax in the country. You know, there couldn't be some level of dedicated funding from that. You know, our MVR fees are now, they used to be low, they're now way up there. And then we have an added $2 surcharge. You couldn't have something from that. That would be, to me, a much more stable basis of funding.
Yeah, I think it's just be difficult to get at that pot of money because you know you've been up here for many a budget season. So, but I get your point, and I heard what you told Representative Dush previously.
And you know, and understand. I mean, look, you can mandate it, but appreciating Representative Dush's point about the constituents in his area have seen, you know, their incomes go down. Okay, but if this is going to raise their insurance costs, it's going to raise their insurance costs. I mean, you know, it doesn't. I don't believe that this is an instance where insurance companies have been collecting premium for this and somehow not paying it. That I would dispute. You know, so this is. I mean, you're exactly right. It's hard to get money out. You know, it's hard to get money out of anything. I mean, you know, it's not like our policyholders say, "Boy, we're happy to pay an increase in premium." So I sympathize with your concerns there, but I do know that there are bills bouncing around in the General Assembly saying, hey, some of those excess fees, we want to give the money back, and we're trying to expedite that. It may be that rather than giving the money back, you may want to dedicate some of that funding to this. You also may want to readjust some of the tax revenues. That, you know, how much of this should be going to the pension versus should be going to the volunteer fire companies is a legitimate concern.
And that's a good lead. With the revenue for the relief funds, the foreign insurance tax, just to run through some quick numbers. So 11, 12, your stats from Department of Revenue, there was 78 million collected. Only 63 million went to the volunteers. The next year, 87 collected, 72 to the volunteers. 84 collected in 13-14, 68 to the volunteers. 81 collected the next year, 65 to the volunteers. 80 collected the next year, 65 to the volunteers. 63 collected the next year, 60 to the volunteers. 89, almost 90 collected in 17-18, only 55 million to the volunteers. So you can see that declining. You know, 72, 68, 65, 65, 60, and 55. And this was, again, that's why the SR6 Commission discussed it at length. The chairman and I were in a meeting earlier today with Revenue trying to figure that out, but that's a significant drop in taxes that are being collected with the intent of helping the volunteers, and we're trying to find where that money's going. It's being collected.
Yeah, because actually, it's not a significant drop in the taxes being collected. It's a significant drop
in the
distribution of that tax collection. And as I mentioned before, I get involved with the taxes that come to you. After they come to you, you guys really don't consult with us that much, but I'd be very curious as to what's happening to that money.
Sure. Do you know why in 16-17 collections went from 80 the previous year to 63 million?
No, and anymore, and frankly, I don't know why they went up in 2010, 11, up to, you know, that there was a spike there. It may have been that a given carrier reported on a different time frame, something like that. I would have been, if it hadn't bounced right back up the year after, I'd be more, I'd say, gee, did somebody come, you know, go from being a foreign company to a domestic company or something like that? But that may be, and again, you'd have to consult with the Department of Revenue and maybe the Insurance Department as to why that went down.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Gobler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the testimony. I've been trying to wrap my brain a little bit around just how the billing is operating and how it might operate in, because so we agree that there are bills that are currently being sent. On what basis are the bills being paid currently? Is it based on the principle that you mentioned that if it is viewed by the insurance company to be a legitimate liability of the covered policyholder, that it would be paid in that sense?
And I mean, as Representative Ferry has, I don't have the current policies, But there have been, in the past, policies that expressly covered. I mean, more homeowner, frankly, more homeowner than auto, which doesn't do you any good in your I-80 scenario. But on the homeowner side, there have been policies in the past that have covered X amount for in the case of a fire.
Okay, and then I wanted to bounce off of you the two scenarios that seem to creep in when you've got the out-of-state dynamic, and if you could help me understand how it currently would be handled. The first scenario would be, how would a Pennsylvania insurance company handle it if they receive a bill from an out-of-state fire company? I'm driving in Maryland and have an accident, and the fire company wants to bill me. How would my insurance company handle that? And then on the flip side, how would, let me make sure I get that right. How would a Pennsylvania fire company deal with an out-of-state insurance company if they're trying to submit that bill? Could you talk through those two examples?
Sure. The easier one. I mean, if it's a Pennsylvania fire company, whether it's billing State Farm or Erie, you take a foreign company and a domestic company, same thing. I mean, because it's the policy coverage to the Pennsylvania insured that's going to control. And it's going, and frankly, it's going to be this is why we're dealing with a proposed, it's why we have a bill here. It's the Pennsylvania state law that controls. In your situation that you mentioned, if you're driving down in Maryland, again, the first question will be, what's your insurance policy say? Does it cover for volunteer fire companies in responding to an auto accident? Second question is going to be, does Maryland law have something that makes you as a policyholder uniquely liable, and your insurance company may step in depending on the policy language in that instance?
Okay, and in the first scenario, I just want to make sure I understand. I'm talking about not just a Pennsylvania covered individual with a Pennsylvania or out-of-state insurance company. If somebody from Ohio is driving through my community, I've got Interstate 80, and they're the responsible party.
Okay. I was thinking in homeowners or something like that. If it's it goes to what I was talking about. What's a real solution on the I-80 instance? If it's a foreign driver, if it's a driver from another state driving through Pennsylvania, again, unless his policy, Pennsylvania law doesn't apply to him. It's his insurance policy that was issued in Ohio or New York or Nebraska or wherever he was from. Any more than, frankly, if he's driving through Pennsylvania, he doesn't all of a sudden, the minute he comes into Pennsylvania, become full or limited tort. And the insurance laws of his state will apply to him regardless of what state he's in.
Okay. So in that case, do we currently have, under current law, would a fire company submit the bill and see what happens? Pretty much, if they're going to bill, and then sometimes it gets paid, sometimes it doesn't.
When you're dealing with a foreign entity insured, in a policy issued in another state, yeah. But whether currently or under this bill, if you revise it to be a pure insurance mandate, it wouldn't apply to the Ohio insurance policy.
Got it. Okay. So, and then thanks for helping me just kind of get those different iterations kind of teased out a little bit. And the other thing I wanted to comment on, this was alluded to earlier, but I think that it is important to kind of calibrate our discussion around what the purpose of the bill would be. I would agree with you that the purpose of this bill would not suggest some sort of a stable source of revenue for any company. But as I have conversations with fire companies, the amount of fundraising they have to do to provide a state of readiness or to be able to just simply field the equipment that they field, keep it up to date, is significant. And then if on top of that they're also having to sell chicken dinners, raise money or whatever to replace the oil dry, the fuel in their tanks, so on and so forth, it's making that economic break-even point for these volunteer fire companies that much more out of reach. So I guess the other question I would have is, if we all buy insurance for the purpose of covering what we're liable for, if I have just a simple fender bender where I bump somebody's car and I create a nick in the paint, I'm responsible for repainting that, or for paying the cost of repainting that, and my insurance policy would cover it. Why is this conceptually so much different to think that if I cause a fuel leak and the fire company has to throw down oil dry, that that my responsibility and my insurance coverage would be handling that outcome of that accident in the same way. Just want to have a conversation about the paradigm that we're in and how it's similar.
And the distinction is in the latter scenario that you talked about, and it goes into the bill as well, is the individual liable? We cover if he is, but what you find in these, and what we found in past discussions on this, you'll have the volunteer fire company say, you know what, we're going to bill you if your insurance company is going to pick it up. We're not going to bill you if the company won't. We're going to bill you if unless you paid us a subscription fee. I don't know what the subscription fee amount is. And again, as I mentioned, is it $10, $20, $50, whatever it may be. We're going to bill you, but not if we got any local tax revenue. So it's not so much that you, the individual, are responsible. We'll cover you if you, the individual, are responsible. I mean, if you had coverage for that. I mean, that's why, that's why I have an insurance policy. It doesn't, it's the parameters of the insurance policy are within that policy. But that's why one of the questions here, and again, going to, having an easily maintained, revenue source, and verifiable source, this, to me, replaces the complexity and the hassle of doing fundraising with the complexity and hassle of figuring out in each individual claim, gee, was Johnny Jones, did he pay us a subscription fee? I mean, what's the general tax ordinance? And now I got to look into, and now and only then will I go to his insurance policy. I think that gets to be a fairly, that's not always as simple as you would think. And certainly from an insurance company's perspective, okay, we're going to charge you one rate if you paid a subscription fee and another rate if you didn't. That becomes its own complexity. I mean, I would say, God, aren't you guys better off trying to get better use out of our tax dollars that we're already paying to you? Which is, as was mentioned, and we as an insurance industry are contributing $85 million a year, roughly on average over the last decade, to this. I mean, it's not we're not shirking from our duty, and we're suggesting other ways to raise revenue. It's just I think you want it to be a more efficient way than the piecemeal billing.
I appreciate the information. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all.
Representative Rigby.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Marshall, we keep reverting back to volunteer. So I guess my question would be the same as it was with the gentleman that spoke earlier. If a paid service responds to a vehicle accident and puts those absorbents down and bills the insurance companies, is there a question then about payment then?
You know what, and that was actually what was dealt with in Act 69 2007, as I mentioned, because we came upon that with police department, and there we said no. They don't. I mean, they're paid through tax dollars. That's a service they provide. And by the same token, I mean, this bill is targeted at to provide billing relief for volunteer fire companies. If you live in the city of Philadelphia with a paid fire department, it doesn't then bill the individual for putting out the fire. That's what the individual pays property taxes for.
Thank you.
One last question, Sam. If we amended the bill to make an insurance company law bill, would you support the legislation?
No.
Okay.
And again, but I mean, I'd at least know what it is you meant to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you could pass it, and I mean, frankly, as an industry, we'll adapt to it one way or the other. I mean, we'll raise premiums as we have to raise premiums, but I think that in terms, and I say no, and somebody says, okay, so you don't want to help out volunteer fire companies. That's not it at all. What we're suggesting, what we're advocating, is that you come up with a way that provides, frankly, a quantifiable, stable source of revenue that addresses, because their needs vary from company to company and from region to region, that you do it in that more objective fashion. And I think, I mean, I've outlined, we've talked about, and Representative Ferry mentioned the disparity between what we pay in taxes and what somehow is then going into the wallets of the volunteer fire companies. I have no idea why that variance is. We've outlined some other revenue sources that are out there that may be appropriate. You can always, you can dedicate a portion of some other segment of
but that's not what this bill is about. You've gone off track on the bill. The bill isn't about providing revenue source to a permanent revenue source to the fire companies. It's about allowing them to bill for a service they provide when they provide it.
But, okay,
if they provide it.
I thought, from listening to the panel before, the need for the bill is that our volunteer fire companies need money. I mean, they need other things. I mean, they need volunteers too, but they need money and that added revenue.
Yeah.
And so, in that sense,
But you're answering a question by saying that, well, we need to propose permanent sources of revenue. Well, I would still think even if we had a permanent source of revenue, they're entitled to be reimbursed for a service they provide.
And Mr. Chairman, then if this were written to say that volunteer fire companies are now going to bill their residents.
Well, they provided it for free for so long that now they just can't afford to.
No, no, I'm not. If you'll indulge me just as one time, but if you were to say, and that goes to the question of, do you mean for this bill to say here they can go bill the resident as long as the insurance company pays for it, or they bill the resident, period? And those are two different questions. If you mean to say that volunteer fire companies can bill their residents for their services, insurance will adjust to it. But it's an uneven, I think it's a challenge if you want to go into an uneven scenario. Hey, we'll bill you if you have insurance, but we won't bill you if you don't. That I don't think is sound public policy. But if you, and again, and then that goes to...
I think everybody would get a bill that under the same circumstances, and if they paid or not, then it would be up to the township to say, if the insurance company doesn't pay it, we're taking them to court. If the homeowner doesn't pay, we're going to do the same thing.
Okay. And if there's going to be that even enforcement and that even application, that's something to consider. That's not the way the bill's written.
Yeah. But I think as far as permanent funding sources, that's our problem to solve. But we're looking at seeing it's trying to get a fair reimbursement. I think most of these people are talking a $500 reimbursement or in that area to send out probably $2-3 million worth of equipment with people on a truck that aren't being paid a penny, most of them, to provide that service.
The bills I've seen have been far in excess of $500, but be that as may, if the goal here, I apologize because I thought, and from reading SR 60, I thought the goal was that fire companies needed money, and presumably you'd want that to be a stable source of revenue, not just an additional source of revenue.
Well, I think I agree. I think there's that, but I don't think you're addressing a problem that the bill doesn't address, is a permanent source of funding. We all realize that if you get 5 calls a year, this bill doesn't help you at all as a source of funding. If you're getting 50 to 100 calls a year, I go to at least 4 or 5 fire banquets every year, and there are firefighters that I see getting awards for doing, for responding to over 300 fires in a year. And so, I mean, there are companies out there that are putting out a tremendous amount of dollars on their own to respond to. I mean, if you're responding to 300 fires a year, you're a busy fire department.
And presumably you're getting a fair amount of money. But again, that's a question for this committee. But presumably you're getting a fair amount of money from the fire tax. That's what it's meant for. That's what it's there for. And if there needs to be a greater allocation,
it's obvious. We don't have a fire tax. We have the fire relief tax. Is that what you're talking about?
That's paid.
Okay.
That's paid by us as a tax.
No, it's paid by the ratepayers.
Ultimately, yes. I mean, as
you collect it and send it to us.
In the same sense that any cost you impose on us is paid by the policyholder. Yeah. So you're right. I mean, it's going to, if there's going to be increased money, it's got to come ultimately out of the pockets of citizens. I mean, whether we're the conduit or you're the conduit. The question is, how much money and how's it going to be apportioned? And I would suggest that it would be, because we are just as committed as anybody else to the well-being of the fire company system in Pennsylvania. We depend on it too. I'd suggest that you'd be better off having a more stable revenue source than the somewhat random source that can happen, particularly in rural areas where you're saying, God, it all depends on how many claims I get in a given year. Because that can go way up and way down. I hope it goes way down.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members? Sam, thanks for being here today. We appreciate your testimony. Okay, where's my glasses? Here we go. Our next panel is Terrence J. Fitzpatrick, President and CEO of Energy Association of Pennsylvania. Thank you. You can begin when you're ready.
Thanks very much, Chairman Brar, Chairman Snato, members of the committee. I am Terry Fitzpatrick, the President and CEO of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. We're a trade group comprised of the electric and natural gas utilities operating in the Commonwealth. Thanks for the chance to be here to talk about House Bill 759. The members of our association, the electric and natural gas utilities, are engaged members of the communities in which they serve, and they contribute to the communities in a number of ways, including providing financial support to civic organizations and volunteering the time of employees to work on various projects. Utilities also cooperate with volunteer fire companies, such as by facilitating meetings to discuss how to work safely around utility facilities. Finally, electric and gas utilities also provide tax support to local governments through the public utility realty tax, which is collected by the Commonwealth and the proceeds of which are paid in part to local governments. While utilities support volunteer fire companies and recognize the funding challenges they face, we do have concerns regarding some of the provisions of House Bill 759. The bill establishes liability to pay the response costs of fire companies. The operative language provides that a person involved in an emergency that necessitates an official dispatch of a fire company shall be liable for the actual and reasonable response costs incurred by the fire company. The term person is not defined in the legislation, but it's defined elsewhere in the Emergency Management Services Code to include public utilities. Therefore, we would conclude that the term person in the bill would be construed to include public utilities. It's not completely clear what it means to be, quote, involved in an emergency, but the language seems overbroad in its face. With respect to public utilities, it could be construed to mean that utilities are liable for fire company response costs anytime their facilities are damaged, resulting in an emergency, regardless of whether the utility caused the emergency or was at fault, i.e. was negligent for the incident. For example, it appears that under this standard, an electric utility could be liable for response costs where a driver struck a pole, resulting in a downed line, or where a hurricane causes widespread damage to electric facilities. Similarly, a gas utility could be liable where an equipment operator struck a natural gas line after neglecting to contact Pennsylvania One Call to have the lines marked. Holding a utility liable in these circumstances is a dramatic extension of current standards that base liability upon proof of causation and fault. The standard of liability in House Bill 759 contrasts sharply with the statutory obligation of public utilities under the Public Utility Code. That duty is to furnish and maintain adequate, safe, and reasonable service and facilities for the accommodation, convenience, and safety of its patrons. Really, the requirement is to provide reasonable service and facilities. It doesn't demand perfection. The PUC's regulations also make this very clear, saying that public utilities shall at all times use every reasonable effort to properly warn and protect the public from danger and shall exercise reasonable care to reduce the hazards to which the public is subjected because of its equipment and facilities. But the standard of liability in House Bill 759 would hold utilities liable for not being able to prevent every emergency involving their facilities. And this result is unreasonable and we believe contrary to public policy. House Bill 759 would create additional costs for utilities that would lead to higher rates for customers. All or almost all of the costs imposed by this legislation would fall directly on utilities and not on insurance companies. Utilities have varying types of insurance coverage, but they typically either have very high deductibles, $1 million or more, or they self-insure. Therefore, the apparent assumption in the legislation that insurers would be responsible for paying response costs in most cases is inaccurate for public utilities. The costs paid by utilities for these claims would become part of the historical experience used to develop a revenue requirement in the utility's next rate filing, resulting in higher rates for citizens of the Commonwealth. And we respectfully submit that it's not appropriate to shift the cost of volunteer fire companies to utility ratepayers in this manner. And it's not in my written testimony, but it also occurred to me from listening to the testimony of the fire company folks that there's another issue here. It's an equity issue. Some customers already pay for fire protection if they're in a city that has a paid fire department, or, for example, in the borough that imposes a fire tax. Those people are paying for the fire protection through those taxes. However, if costs of volunteer fire companies are allocated to utilities in this manner and then recovered through utility rates, those customers who are paying the taxes for fire departments are going to end up pay again, because utilities don't make specific rates for every municipality in their service territory. It's a uniform rate. So some customers are going to be paying twice, essentially. They'll be paying through taxes for fire protection, and then they would be paying through utility rates for fire protection as well. The Energy Association requests that if the legislation moves forward, it be amended to make clear that public utilities are exempt from paying response costs under the bill. If utilities are not exempted, we would request in the alternative that the bill be amended to clarify the following issues. Is it the intention of the legislation to impose liability for response costs for any emergency that involves utility facilities, even where the utility did not cause the incident and/or was not at fault? If more than one person is involved in an emergency, how are the response costs to be apportioned between or among them? And finally, does the language in Section 79B05 entitled Cost of Appeal mean that if either party prevails in an appeal, that it's entitled to recover its costs from the other party, or is it only the appealing party that may have to pay costs if it does not prevail? We'd be happy to work with you and your staff, Mr. Chairman, in addressing these issues. Thanks again for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to address any questions you have.
Frank, did you have a question? No, not on this one. Okay. Representative Dush?
Yes, and thank you for your testimony. One thing I do want to have the utility companies responsible for is when you do have down lines, act of God, a tree down on a line. If we have guys sitting out there for 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, volunteers who are our fire police, and they're sitting there and guarding that power line or whatever and protecting the public. But at the same time, these guys have jobs. They have other things going on as well. If there's a delay, an unreasonable delay, we're seeing a lot more of it now, especially in rural Pennsylvania. And our guys are stuck out there for hours, and they're not going to walk away. They're not going to drive off and leave your power lines exposed to the public. And I see this as a means to kind of spur the industry into getting out there and having more reasonable response times to address those problems. So on the other stuff when it comes to liabilities, we'll get together and examine this, but I believe the language is clear enough that you're going to be able to, it'll be the responsible parties that are going to end up getting billed with this. Our guys aren't looking for massive claims. They're looking to get reimbursed for, like I said, the pigs, the oil absorbents, and the stuff like that, the actual expenses. And that's why we specifically targeted the Stafford Law, the federal Stafford Law. It's very narrow in scope, and when it comes to you're not paying for somebody to be out there on a personnel level. We're not asking you to pay somebody $16, $17, $18 an hour to be sitting out there. What we are demanding is that when equipment is being utilized, supplies are being utilized, equipment is being destroyed, that those types of things can be reimbursed.
Representative, thanks for those comments. With respect to unreasonable delays and a utility getting out to a down line, I guess I would say first, if it's really unreasonable, that's different than the language is in the bill, which seems to suggest you're liable regardless of whether it was reasonable. And that was kind of the point. Was kind of the point I was getting at, in that the language does not, to us, it seems to hold us liable whether really we were at fault or whether we weren't at fault. The other thing I would say, too, is with respect to whether some of those delays are reasonable, and I don't know the circumstances of all these things, and it could be right, but there could be instances, too. You know, I talked about a hurricane where have outages all over the place, so everybody might be spread thin in those situations, even with contractors coming into play. So I don't know particularly whether that's the case. And I'd be happy to talk to you about what's going on there in those instances and seeing if we could help get you some information, get it addressed.
Well, I'll just follow up on page 2. It's actual and reasonable response costs, an amount that is consistent with what a reasonable person would pay in the same or similar circumstances.
Right.
So we're very specific with this, and it was done for a reason. Tying that, as well as, like I said, to the Stafford, I think that clearly delineates that we're seeking just the reimbursements.
Okay. And, you know, I'm happy to work with you on this, Representative. We haven't had discussions about this up to now. Honestly, this bill wasn't on our radar. I think our filters didn't pick it up because it doesn't mention anything about utilities, so we kind of scrambled to try to figure out how we would be affected by this, but happy to work with you on it.
Yeah, I have to agree with Representative Dush. The biggest complaint I get from a lot of my emergency responder companies out there is that they end up having to babysit a scene, whether it's some type of a gas leak or a downed electric wires. My fire police, my fire companies, especially after a storm, will complain that they get left there, and sometimes for over 24 hours, and that's what one of the biggest complaints is. I think if you look at this bill, why I would oppose any type of an exemption for any industry or any group at this point in time is the word. I think you're assuming that these people want to make money off of response, and they're not. They're looking to recover their costs, which probably are very easily to document. And to say that one industry should be allowed and exempted out of this, I could never support that, and I won't. And and we will work with you if there's language we can put in to safeguard against what you would consider unreasonable billing. But to assume that rates are going to go up around the state if this becomes law, I just can't see it. How many times a year, or how many catastrophes could happen in a year in Pennsylvania that would have to cause the rates to go up? I just can't believe that's unless we were to have a serious earthquake or a hurricane come through our state. I just, and under those circumstances, that I don't see where that would be, the billing would even be an issue at that point, because we'd have the National Guard out there and everybody else.
I get
we
your
could
point.
include them in the bill, though.
I get your point, Representative. It's hard for us to figure out what these would amount to as a practical matter. And I don't mean to be scaremongering here. I mean, the point is more just that the costs come from somewhere. And I think that was a point, you heard from the insurance folks, too. And I'm just trying to make that point. The costs will come from somewhere. Costs that become part of our experience ultimately are reflected in the rates.
Yeah.
I'm also not casting aspersions upon volunteer fire companies that they would try to do something unfair with us. I was really pointing more towards the breadth of that language involved in, which seems to hold everybody liable whether you are responsible in the sense of having done something wrong or having been at fault or having done something unreasonable. It's a different situation if you look at a case and you say, well, that's unreasonable. You didn't get out there. You kind of neglected your duty. That's
Right.
a little different than saying you're responsible anytime something regarding your facilities is involved. So maybe that's a discussion we could have about the language. But I take your point, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Anyone? Thank you for your testimony today. We appreciate you taking time to be with us. Okay, who do we have next? We have I think this is our last panel. Are they on the back here? Okay, we have with us Mr. Don Pangala, Fire Chief, Pine Creek Volunteer Fire Department, Mr. Tracy Zentz, Director, Jefferson County Department of Emergency Service, and Mr. Cris Clark, Deputy Director, 911 Operations, Jefferson County Department of Emergency Services. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today, and you can begin your testimony in whatever order you choose, and begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Don Pangala. I'm the Fire Chief with the Pine Creek Volunteer Fire Department in Jefferson County. I've been in the fire service for 27 years and been Fire Chief for 11. The Pine Creek Volunteer Fire Department responds to an average of 230 to 250 alarms each year. The biggest majority of these alarms are vehicle accidents, and many of those accidents are on Interstate 80. My department operates on an annual budget of about $250,000. We are blessed to have good support from 2 townships we cover. But our volunteers still have to raise over $160,000 each year to be able to provide the services that we offer. On average, it costs my department around $500 to respond to each alarm when factoring in the cost of fuel and the equipment per call. When responding to a large-scale incident, this can be much higher. For alarms involving hazardous materials, we've seen costs for absorbents and cleanup materials sometimes reach $5,000. This equipment, this year we have responded to 197 alarms so far, 64 of those on Interstate 80, costing my department well over $40,000 just for those 64 alarms. One of the biggest factors in that, this year we have some construction going on the interstate, causing some more accidents. As of today, we've recovered $2,400 of these for these costs from the insurance companies that we've billed for reimbursement. These are trucking companies and travelers from out of our area that never contribute to our local taxes or department donations. However, the fire department responding to these alarms across the state receive no additional funding and are forced to pass the liability on to our own municipalities and local residents. We need a way to make insurance companies and trucking companies to be held liable for the cost incurred due to the accidents. The volunteer crisis in this state is highly fueled by the amount of fundraising that we have to do in order to survive. I highly recommend and thank you for House Bill 759. I believe this legislation will help the volunteer fire departments continue to serve and protect our Commonwealth.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to speak with the committee today and all of you. As mentioned before, my name is Tracy Zentz. I am the Director of Emergency Services for Jefferson County. I'll explain a little bit more about my background to you in just a couple moments. We have all heard that back in the 1970s there was over 300,000 volunteers, and today there's around 30,000. We've all heard that emergency services across the Commonwealth and our nation are struggling financially to survive. And we've all heard how difficult it is to recruit new members because of the responsibilities to not only respond on emergencies, but to train and to raise funds for the organization to survive. There has been dialogue after dialogue regarding who is responsible, and there has been many ideas floated around on how and who can fix it. It falls under the old saying, kick the tin can down the road until we can see how bad it gets, or pass the buck for the next guys to fix. President Harry S. Truman described his administration as the one responsible during his time in office and stated the buck stops here. If we keep passing the buck, the problem will continue to get worse, or we can start working together. Although overdue, the time is now to roll up our sleeves and get to work. The fire service has lived on tradition, but some things need to change to continue to live. I've been involved in public safety for the past 33 years. I've dedicated my duty within the fire service, emergency medical service, dispatching for local and state police, and currently serving as the county's emergency management coordinator, a position that I've held for the past 15 years. I am honorably discharged member of the Pennsylvania Army National Guard, serving 10 years as a combat engineer with the former 876 Engineer Battalion, a unit under the 28th Infantry Division. I am also retired police communications operator for the Pennsylvania State Police. I've seen a lot of death and destruction over the years, as well as many changes on how emergency services must be delivered today, mostly in part because of regulatory changes and demands from the public. As we discuss House Bill 759 today, this important piece of legislation is crucial for the survival of emergency services. As most of my colleagues today will give you estimated costs of response, let me describe to you the situation in another way. Interstate 80 dissects Jefferson County's rolling hills and valleys. It is one of the most curved roads throughout the region, bringing us all kinds of emergency situations, from vehicle accidents, fires, hazardous material incidents, and medical emergencies, for example, only to be compounded once hazardous weather strikes, from summertime storms to winter weather whiteouts. When you look at the stakeholders that must respond to these incidents, the Pennsylvania State Police, Emergency Medical Services, to include Air Medical, PennDOT, County Emergency Management, the Department of Environmental Protection, Towing Services, as well as the Fire Service, the only one element of these agencies is not getting paid, and that is our fire departments. These incidents can be complex, and sometimes, depending on how catastrophic it is, can span 10 to 12 hours in duration, depending on the situation. There are several municipalities within our county that do provide their fire departments with dedicated fire tax, as well as donations to support their operations. But there are many that do not. Most believe this is a free service, which is nowhere near free. The volunteer fire departments must rely on fundraisers, selling raffle tickets, sending out donation letters, and community events just to keep the doors open. All of these actions cost money and time to accomplish, and with the reduction in ranks of volunteers, the remaining volunteers struggle to do all this while responding to the calls for help every second of the day. House Bill 759 gives these emergency service organizations the opportunity to recoup actual and reasonable response costs. Having oversight of this through the State Fire Commissioner's Office and the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency is vital to not only protect the public at large, but to protect our dedicated first responders in the performance of their duties. I ask you to support this important piece of legislation, but not to stop here. There are many other important issues that affect public service within the Commonwealth that needs to be addressed. I implore you all to look at these issues so we don't keep kicking the can down the road or passing the buck. And I would be willing to roll up my sleeves and help you accomplish those things. I thank you for the opportunity to address this chamber in support of my colleagues within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
First of all, I don't want to sound like a broken record of you're going to hear the same story from fire departments and so forth in relation to these issues. But first of all, thank you for this stage and opportunity. As all of you know, every passing moment creates difficulty to operate any emergency service organization, whether it be a lack of willing personnel, financial inhibitions, or simply not having enough time in a God-given day. Whether we gather to provide insight in one of the dozens of topics that can benefit fire departments across the Commonwealth. The majority of the first line of defense for our residents, visitors, and stakeholders relies on self-generated funds to provide those services voluntarily. My name is Cris Clark. I am the Deputy Director for Emergency Services underneath Tracy here. I've also been in the fire service for 25 years, being the fire chief of the Warsaw Township Volunteer Fire Company for 16 of those. For 15 or nearly 15 with 911 emergency management. And I'm also fortunate enough to serve on the 911 Advisory Board. But in this 25 years of my involvement, and at this point in my life, I'm finally realizing that the past 25 years aren't something I'm going to get back. And I guess maybe I'm starting to hit my midlife crisis and realizing that. I don't have the time that I once had to put in, to dedicate that I once had. I have a wife that's keeps me busy, 3 children and 2 foster children that we have. But the countless hours of fundraising to raise those funds to buy the fuel for the fire trucks, to pay for the gas to run our portable equipment, to purchase the apparatus to put the fuel in. Many departments and companies have millions in assets to be able to protect life and property and provide these services. But we have to stop and consider and think about over the years, and it doesn't take too many years, Commonwealth-wide, the billions of raffle tickets sold. And when you think about it, it is billions of raffle tickets. I would have to take a part-time job if I bought everything I was offered in tickets. Billions of donations letters sent out. The millions of dinners and barbecues held. The countless chickens that have given their lives for us. And I do like chicken wings and barbecues myself. So, but we do that all as volunteers to save lives. How many man hours does this equate? It's immeasurable. These immeasurable hours funded by volunteers, for volunteers, to volunteer. As volunteers, we choose to do so, but anything to ease a workload allows us more time with our families or allows us to maximize the funds for other important expenditures. As many people appreciate the service provided by these women and men, equally with our society, there are a lot of those who just expect that that is a free service because they don't know any different. Without the details, a residential structure fire can very easily utilize the entire funds generated by one of our turkey and biscuit dinners held by our fire company. The days of preparation preceding the day of the dinner, an evening to hold the dinner and clean up, all to have the ability to fund a free service so that volunteers have the safest, most effective equipment to provide that service. Homeowners insurance will provide payment to have fire damage mitigated, restored to normal living. Serve Pro, Service Master, they get paid to come in and clean up the mess. Conditions, to replace furniture, to pay a contractor to rebuild if necessary. Insurances of motor vehicle accidents will make payment to fix and replace vehicles, replace an entire vehicle, an $80,000 vehicle. Repair property damage, cover medical costs, provide transportation and pay for tow trucks. Jefferson County alone has had more of its share of interstate closures, which you've heard from Chief Pangallo, from Tracy. When factored in the amount of emergency fire equipment needed to handle one of those scenes lately, provide aid to the local police, the state police, PennDOT, for secondary road closures, that's usually what my company gets involved with. We're not along the interstate, we're about 8 miles off, but we still are affected by those road closures. I have to provide fire police along the side roads because GPSs want to take tractor trailers down a dirt road or down a township road that a township that has a pot to pee in just put $500,000 into that road for tractor trailers to destroy. So we go out there and save our township more money. So one of these incidents, this is an estimate from just some of my calculations. One of those incidents alone, just a minor incident without a major fuel cleanup or hazmat, is going to cost a fire service between $3,000 and $5,000. How many of those did you run on the interstate this year, Chief?
67 this year.
67 incidents at $3,000 to $5,000. When factoring in fuel, equipment usage, materials, many of these incidents can span 10 hours or more. But for many instances, fire service is not in the equation to even recoup, and I stress recoup a portion of that actual incurred cost to respond to and mitigate. It is overdue to establish a controlled mechanism for fire departments to be able to recuperate for reasonable and real cost associated with their emergency response and scene mitigation. And I do stress controlled so departments are not tempted to overbill nor take advantage of this opportunity. Allowing the Office of the State Fire Commissioner and PEMA to oversee and establish procedural guidelines I feel is important. I would hate to see this turn into a fundraiser of sorts for some companies or some departments, and I could see that. Please consider this long overdue proposal of House Bill 759 and that Representative Dush and his colleagues have put forth. And again, thank you for your time and consideration and moving forward with it.
Thank you, gentlemen. Your testimony was right on target with what we were hoping to hear from you, and I agree with you. I think when he brought up the point that everybody on the scene gets paid, when there's a tragedy or whatever, the only people that don't get paid are the firefighters.
That's correct.
And to me, that's a tragedy. And I think one of you said that 160 some responses to auto accidents in your county. Was that you?
We've had, so far this year, we've responded to 197 alarms, 64 of those on the interstate.
Or 64 accidents and $40,000 in cost on those accidents.
Yes.
Now, what would most of that cost be?
So that's fuel costs, absorbent materials for fuel leaks, just the cost of our. I took the cost of our equipment over the expected life expectancy of a truck, our rescue truck. Between the truck and the equipment on it, we have well over $1 million just in that truck. With our heavy rescue, an engine, and a squad for traffic control, we're looking at, we've got over $1.5 million worth of equipment every time it goes out. If you get 20 years of expectancy out of that equipment for, the amount of calls we run on, you're right around $500 for every time you go out the door.
Yeah.
And then when you factor in the costs of the additional cleanup materials.
Can you pull that mic a little closer to you?
Sorry about that. The additional costs for the materials that we use, that's where my $40,000 came from for those calls this year.
Okay, great. Representatives, any questions? Yes, Representative Gobler. Representative Dush, you have a question too? Okay.
Gentlemen, I just wanted to thank you for your testimony. I'm your neighbor, hailing from Du Bois, so glad to see a couple of folks from Jefferson County down here. I just wanted to underscore what I think is so important, what I was trying to calibrate in on my prior questions. Cris, you really kind of took that home. The idea that that we're looking at the expenses that are incurred by fire departments in responding to an accident, and I'm still trying to wrap my brain around why we would ever generate a system that doesn't capture the diesel fuel, the oil dry, the pigs, in the same way that we think about the utility pool that somebody crashed into, or the mailbox that somebody clipped, or the person's bumper that needs to be repainted. It's all part of the expense of that accident. So I just think that that's something that is so important. The other thing I wanted to make as a comment to this is I think it is illuminating for us to think about the fact that the volunteer firefighters are the only responders that are not getting paid. But I also think it's illuminating to point out that even with this proposal, the volunteer firefighters still aren't asking to get paid, just asking to get reimbursed for the materials that are used so that you can maybe spend a little bit less time at chicken dinners and bingo and selling tickets and all that. So I commend you for what you do. I hear a lot of similar feedback, obviously, in my own district, and I'm sure you've probably served side by side on the same incident scene with folks from my own district. But the importance of this in recognizing how much the volunteer crisis, which is really the reason I'm on this committee, is I wanted to request the opportunity to be involved in these conversations, to be able to address that. It is conflated by this. So thank you for what you do, and I hope that we can move this forward toward a partial solution. And I think the challenge for this is there's no silver bullet, but this is certainly an important component. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add just real quick here, I'm sorry. If I could just add something to put into perspective. Back in the 1970s, or just prior to the late 60s and the 70s, a fire department really only responded to fires. They did not respond to the vehicle accidents unless it was something catastrophic. They didn't respond to a lot of medical emergencies, or when there were storms down, it was mostly taken care of by the public works for those communities. But over the years, the fire service especially has become the catch-all for everything that nobody else wants to deal with. And there is a reason why you have the burnout with the volunteers. The volunteers are declining. They don't want to respond on all that. The costs keep escalating. The equipment's wearing out a lot quicker because it's being utilized a lot more. So when you look at the overall fire responses are down, but it's everything else that's driving the cost of the fire service up.
Good.
If I can, Mr. Chairman, let me ask, the cleanup of the site, how has that changed since the 1970s till today?
Well,
like What did you do with all the fluids that were in the 70s and laying on the street and everything?
They're still there.
Yes.
Back when I first started, the fire chief says pull the hose out and hose it down.
Exactly.
You know, and regulations have changed. We don't do that anymore. We can't do that anymore. We have to be more better stewards of our environment and the community we live in. So that's why the costs are there now for the essential cleanup, the controlling measures to mitigate those incidents from happening.
Yeah, it's a different paradigm.
So if there's any hazardous waste left on the scene, you're responsible for its disposal.
Well, under my position with the county under Act 165, which the county is responsible for response for any hazardous material incident within the county, we help coordinate that cleanup response. But the fire departments are our first line of defense between them and our certified hazmat team to respond and control that situation. So they're utilizing a lot of their material ahead of time, their pigs, their booms, their absorbent materials, the oil dry, those kind of things. And then a cleanup contractor will be hired to come and pick that up. The fire departments don't actually take and dispose of that, but another company's coming in, another company that's getting paid to pick all that stuff up and clean it up and move on.
Is that only when it's a county hazmat response team showing up?
When it is a hazmat response, or in our case, large fuel, gasoline spills. We just had an incident on Interstate 80 on Saturday where we had 150 gallon of diesel fuel spilled with 22,000 pounds of semi-sweet chocolate chips. They don't make very good chocolate chip cookies, but it does make a heck of a mess that we have to deal with at that time. So,
thank you.
I do want to expound on that, Mr. O'Leary's statement of county hazmat team. Jefferson County doesn't have an actual hazmat team. So a lot of those operational functions for that operational level fall right on the fire departments. And I think you're going to see that a lot along the northern tier of the state, because they just can't fund a hazardous material team. Yeah, and a contract out for us for an actual team to come in, is a 2.5 hour response potentially, 2 to 2.5 hours. So that fire department, they're burdened more with that initial operational phase.
If you have a hazardous M&M spill, call my secretary.
What color?
She always has a big dish of M&Ms, so she'll
Red or
be there
blue?
too.
I'll give you my cell phone number.
Yeah. And hey, we understand that a good friend of ours, Chuck Gresley, he's in our office all the time talking to us about helping out and everything. So when you see him, tell him we said hi. Okay. Any other questions? Representative Dush, you had one. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Don, do you know how many times you responded just in the last 3 months out there on 80? I know that with that construction, there was a pretty big spurt.
Yeah, there was a range, I believe, from April 22nd through just a couple weeks ago. We were in the range of, I believe, 48 or 50, just in that period of time during a construction phase.
Right. And then Tracy, you touched on it about the seasonal changes, the whiteouts that we experience up there. Can you address a little bit about how much of an increase we get in responses up there on
Sure.
that?
It usually takes about the first month and a half of winter weather for drivers to become seasons to that again, because they seem to forget how to drive as soon as the first flake of snow hits the ground. And we've seen some pretty significant accidents. We had one up near the Kyle Lake area of Falls Creek near the Jefferson-Clearfield County line. It had over 70 vehicles involved in it. So there always is that potential. I will say that some of the legislative changes that PennDOT has made, you folks have made, the lower speed limits and so forth during those conditions have helped us out tremendously.
Now, the point I wanted to make with both of those comments is from the insurance industry, we're heard over and over again about a stable funding stream. These incidents don't come on a stable basis. The expenses that you guys have to deal with, especially Dawn right there and Chris at your companies, you have to deal with those as they occur. So one of the benefits of this bill is that when you have those increased expenses that come as a result of a spate of accidents because of road construction, or if you have a seasonal occurrence, those kinds of changes, that's where you need those spikes in recouping those losses. And that's one of the key things about this bill, is it's meant to address recouping those things that a stable platform isn't meant to address.
And to expound on that, I'll use my company as a prime example. Our major fundraiser is a flea market. We hold 6 flea markets from May through October, and it's in Hazen. It's a very nice flea market if anybody's interested in attending. However, you know, it's gone down along with all of our other fundraisers over the years. It's not as good as it was. We lost bingo about 10 years ago, exactly 10 years ago. Our dinners that we have, we were barely breaking even. We're probably not going to be able to continue them because they're just not breaking even anymore. You don't get the support from the community like you used to because of generational changes and people's wants and needs. However, through that winter month, or that winter period from October through May, we're generating very little funds in my company. And I'm sure there's other companies the same. We heard one earlier of an event they hold on the 4th of July, that's their fundraiser for the year. So again, being able to recoup some costs through the winter for the structure fires, for the increase of motor vehicle accidents because of the weather conditions, it can be paramount on our survival for the winter. I know this past winter, we had some expenses last year we weren't ready for, let's say, prepared for budget-wise, but they had to be met. So going into the winter, we had less funds, and actually had to borrow a little bit of money to make it through the winter, something that we're not proud of having to do, not used to having to do, but we had to do it to survive through the winter. However, recouping some of those costs through the winter months, it could have made a huge difference for us.
Okay. Anybody, any questions? Anyone else? Sorry about that. No other questions. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Okay, we appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
I want to thank all our panelists for participating today. We heard some excellent testimony on House Bill 759. I look forward to bringing this bill before the committee this fall for consideration. Chairman Sonato, do you have any closing remarks?
I'd just like to thank the members for coming. I think we had some good testimony from all the presenters today. It gives us, these hearings give us that opportunity to actually listen to both sides of the issue, and I think we need to do that as we move forward and maybe make some adjustments to the legislation, or maybe not. That depends on the will of the committee and the will of the House. So thank you.
Yeah, I think we learned a lot today about the bill and some of the good points and some of the points that we need to look at, either changing or changing the language a little bit. I want to remind the members that we will be in the same room tomorrow at 9:30 for a hearing on House Bill 1568, which would be one of the pipeline safety bills. Okay? All right. Thank you. This hearing is adjourned.